Picture a man who cannot turn his head, not because he's been injured, not because something has gone wrong with his spine, because fashion demands it, because the strip of stiffened linen locked around his throat is so rigid, so architecturally unyielding, so completely non-negotiable in its refusal to bend or flex or accommodate the basic biological requirement of a human neck to pivot, that he must rotate his entire upper body to look sideways. He must tilt from the hips to look down. He must eat soup with the focus and precision of a watchmaker, because one slight miscalculation of angle and the rim of the bowl catches the edge of the collar and leaves a pale ring of broth on all that white starch, and that mark, that tiny mark that nobody might even notice from across the table, is as legible to every person in the room as a newspaper headline reading, "This man cannot manage himself." Now fill that picture with an entire city of men doing this, not a few eccentrics, not a handful of people with unusual commitments to discomfort. Every clerk, every junior solicitor, every bank teller, every shop assistant with aspirations, every office boy trying to look like something more than an office boy, every man who sits behind a desk and needs the world to understand at a single glance that he works with his mind and not his hands. All of them, hundreds of thousands of them, walking through the streets of Victorian London with their necks encased in 2 inches of starched white linen so rigid it has been known to cut into the skin, so stiff that when a man takes it off at night sometimes there is blood. Add the smell of starch, heated starch, cold starch, starch that has been sitting against warm skin all day and begun its slow transformation into something that smells faintly of chalk and faintly of the person wearing it, and faintly of something you can't quite name, but that lives permanently in the back rooms of laundry houses. Add coal smoke, because it's London and it's 1884 and everything smells of coal smoke, layered over everything, underneath everything, baked into the fabric of every coat and curtain and collar in the city. Add the chemical bite of the new thing, the thing that's just starting to arrive in the cheaper shops, celluloid, the shiny, washable, modern alternative to linen, the collar that doesn't need to be sent to the laundress, the collar that a man on 3 shillings a week can wipe clean with a damp cloth and present to the world looking almost respectable, the collar that, under the right conditions, burns like a candle. That's where we're going tonight. Not to a drawing room, not to a country house where a gentleman adjusts his neckwear before dinner and everything smells of wood smoke and lavender. We're going to a boarding house in Suffolk with thin walls and a shared tin wash basin. We're going to the collar and cuff laundries of 7 Dials, where women stand for 14 hours over steam and starch, their hands raw to the wrist, their lungs full of something hot and white and faintly wrong, producing the pristine rectangles of stiffened linen that keep Victorian civilization looking like it has things under control. We're going to the offices and the counting houses and the narrow streets where a man lives or dies, socially speaking, on the cut and cleanliness of what he has around his neck. We're going to understand from the inside why the Victorians called a particular style of collar the Vata murder, father killer. That is not metaphor. That is documentation. There are coroner's reports. So I make these history stories, and I'm genuinely uncertain whether you're here because you find the social semiotics of Victorian neckwear intellectually compelling, or because you discovered that listening to someone describe the structural engineering of starch at 11 at night makes your brain finally agree to stop producing thoughts and let you sleep. Both are perfectly reasonable. I have no complaints either way. Get comfortable. Adjust the pillow. Here we go. You know the collar is wrong before you even touch it. It is sitting on the small wooden table beside your bed. exactly where you left it last night. You placed it there with some care, propped against the candlestick, because you were afraid of creasing it, because Mrs. Beale on the floor below starched it for you and charged you twopence, and it took her the better part of an afternoon, and she handed it back to you with an expression that said clearly she expected you to be grateful, and you were, you are. But now in the grey light of an October morning it sits there on the table, and it looks like a document, a legal instrument, a thing that will bind you to something you haven't fully agreed to yet. Outside, the bells of St. George the Martyr are going, not urgently, just their usual 6:30 announcement of the morning's arrival, which in this part of London means approximately get up. The day has opinions about you. Your room is cold. It is always cold in October. The boarding house on Tabard Street does not run to fires in individual rooms. There is a stove in the parlour downstairs that Mrs. Beale lights round 7, and the warmth from it travels upward through the house in a slow, uncertain way, reaching the first floor by 8 and the second floor, where your room sits at the back of the building overlooking a narrow court with a pump and 2 cats, by perhaps 8:30, which is roughly an hour after you need to leave. You sit up. The straw mattress shifts and protests under you. Your housemate, a young man named Sidney Poole, who works as a telegraph clerk in the city, and who arrived at the boarding house 2 months before you did, and considers himself therefore something of a veteran, is still apparently asleep in the bed across the room, though from the quality of his breathing you suspect he's simply lying there with his eyes closed, running through his day in advance the way he does, as if life is a list of items to be checked off. You put your feet on the floorboards. The cold comes up through the soles immediately, through the balls of your feet, up your ankles, a specific cold that belongs to old wood and old houses and mornings in October in London in 1884. You know this cold. You have known versions of it your entire life. This is not interesting cold. This is just cold. The cold of being 19 years old and living in a boarding house in Suffolk on 7 shillings a week, because 3 weeks ago, after 2 years of writing letters and sitting examinations and being refused and trying again and being refused again and trying once more, with a growing and carefully concealed desperation, you were offered a position as junior clerk at the firm of Kettleworth, Mapes and Harbury, solicitors, with offices at 14 Fetter Lane, Holborn, and you accepted it before the ink had dried on the letter because the alternative was going back to your father's house in Bermondsey, and you would rather wear a starched collar every day for the rest of your life than do that. Your name is Thomas Harlow. You're 19 years old. You grew up 2 miles from here, which is approximately the distance between your old life and the life you're trying to construct. You stand up, cross the floor in 3 steps and pick up the collar. It is stiff in your hands. Properly stiff, not the vague rigidity of fabric fresh from an iron, but the architectural stiffness of something that has been loaded with paste and pressed under heat and left to cool and set into a shape it will now maintain regardless of what you do to it. It is curved slightly, following the geometry of a neck, specifically not your neck, because it was made to a standard pattern, a collar size 3.5, which the man at the haberdasher's in the borough measured you for with a tape and a slightly pitying expression, and which you have since understood to mean that your neck is marginally larger than average, which is one of those pieces of information that manages to feel both entirely trivial and faintly humiliating. It is white, an absolute white, the kind of white that makes everything around it look slightly dingy, including your hands as you hold it, the white of aspiration, the white of arrival, the white of a person who has arranged to have someone else deal with the dirt. You have been wearing it for 3 weeks. You have not yet stopped noticing it. The trick, Sydney told you on your first day, is the stud. The collar stud. You have 2 of them. One at the back of the collar band where it attaches to the collar proper, and one at the front. The back one is the important one. The back one is what will determine whether the next 10 hours are merely uncomfortable or actively punishing. You need to fasten the back stud first, threading the post through the small hole in the back of the collar band and the corresponding hole in the neckband of your shirt, and then you need to do it tight enough that the collar won't shift and loose enough that your windpipe remains functional. And the space between those 2 requirements is approximately the width of a decision that you make in cold morning light without a mirror, because the mirror is on the landing and the landing is cold, and you do not want to stand on the landing in your shirt sleeves. You fasten the back stud, then the front, then you straighten, and the collar is on. The first sensation is pressure, not pain, not immediately, but the specific awareness of a boundary. Here is where your body ends and where the collar begins. Here is a line you did not draw. The linen presses against the underside of your jaw, firm and cool, just cool enough that your body notes it as a foreign object. The front of the collar, which stands roughly 2 inches high and tapers toward the points that fold down over your cravat, presses against your throat just below the Adam's apple, and if you swallow, which you now do experimentally, there is resistance, not obstruction, not asphyxiation, just a reminder. The collar does not move when you swallow. Your throat moves, and the collar remains still, and the difference between these 2 motions is communicated very directly to your body. You try to turn your head to the right. The collar catches the corner of your jaw and stops you a few degrees short of where you wanted to go. You adjust, turning from the shoulders instead, which is what you have been doing for 3 weeks, and you have mostly stopped noticing it except in moments like this one, morning moments, when the body remembers what it was before it began accommodating other people's requirements. You look at Sydney's bed. Sydney is definitely awake. His eyes are open, staring at the ceiling, his collar already on because Sydney's been doing this for 2 years, and he puts his collar on before he is fully conscious the way other people put on spectacles. Stud catching, he says without moving. No. It'll loosen by noon. He says this every morning. It does not loosen by noon. You begin to dress. Shirt, already on. Waistcoat. You button it from the bottom up, the way your father taught you, which is apparently incorrect. Sydney buttons his from the top down, which is the correct way to ensure it hangs properly, and you have not yet managed to break the habit of doing it wrong, even though the waistcoat hangs identically regardless, and you have checked this empirically. Trousers, jacket. The jacket is black, a sober dark worsted, bought from a second-hand shop on the cut for 4 shillings and 6 pence, and let out across the shoulders by a woman on the next street who does alterations, and it fits you adequately in the way that a thing can fit you without ever quite being yours. Finally, the cravat, grey silk, knotted with the specific competence of someone who has been practicing in a mirror for 3 weeks and has almost gotten it to look like he's been doing it all his life. You look at yourself, or the portion of yourself visible in the small square of mirror you have propped against the wash basin. A gentleman, or the shape of one anyway. The collar holds your chin up. The jacket gives you shoulders. The cravat completes something. In the mirror's small square you look like someone who might belong at a desk at 14 Fetter Lane. You look like a person who has never spent 6 years loading bales at his father's leather yard, never come home in the evenings with his hands black to the wrists from the tanning process, never eaten bread and dripping over the kitchen table, while his father told him he was putting on airs by going to evening school. You look like someone else. Your throat is already beginning to complain about the collar, not loudly. Just a low, continuous note of objection that'll be your background music from now until you get home at 7 this evening and remove the thing and finally breathe. The Vater murder. Father killer. The name comes from the German, and it arrived in English usage sometime in the 1820s, when collars were even higher and stiffer than the ones you're wearing now. Great upstanding points that framed a man's face like a visor, that forced his chin up and kept his head immobile. That were said, and this was widely understood to be only mild exaggeration, to have caused several deaths among elderly gentlemen who fell asleep in their chairs after dinner, and whose collars, in the loosening of unconscious muscle, shifted slightly and compressed the carotid artery, and who were discovered by their families the following morning in the same chair, still upright, still dressed, still wearing the collar that had finished them. The coroners in these cases tended to write down apoplexy, because the alternative, asphyxiated by neckwear, does not suit the dignity of the occasion. But you're not going to die today. You're going to catch the omnibus at 7:15. You eat your breakfast standing at the table in the parlour, because sitting would require a degree of chin-to-chest movement that the collar discourages. Mrs. Beale provides bread, slightly stale and dripping, very slightly rancid, and a cup of tea so strong and dark it is almost opaque. And you eat all of it because 7 shillings a week is 7 shillings a week, and there is not money for anything additional before your wages are paid on Friday. Sydney sits across from you, eating with the practised ease of someone who has made his accommodation with the collar, who has internalized it to the degree that it no longer registers as constraint. He reads a folded newspaper while he eats. He reads the newspaper while he does almost everything. Sydney Poole is 21 years old and already has the habits of a man of 40, which you find both reassuring and slightly alarming. Fog this morning, he says, not looking up. You look at the window. The court outside is a uniform grey. It'll lift, you say. It won't. He is correct. It does not lift. You leave the boarding house at 7:12. The court outside smells of wet stone and the cold particular smell of London in October, which is a composite smell, a blended smell, built up over centuries of coal and river and cooking and animals and people living too close together in too small a space, and which is therefore at once disgusting and somehow deeply familiar. The smell of a city that has never once pretended to be anything other than what it is. You pull your coat up around the collar. The collar does not move. The collar is beyond the reach of external forces. The collar is committed to its position. Tabard Street runs north from the Borough High Street. You walk it in the dark, or not quite the dark. The gas lamps are still burning, casting pools of orange-yellow light that make the fog look substantial, like something you might bump into. And the street has the particular quality of early morning London, which is many people, all of them hurrying, none of them inclined to look at anyone else. A man pushing a cart loaded with cabbage. A woman carrying a bundle wrapped in paper that smells, despite the cold and the fog, powerfully of fish. 2 boys running, already late for somewhere, their boots on the cobbles making a sound like small distant gunshots. You turn onto the Borough High Street and the scale changes. This is one of the city's great thoroughfares, the road south from London Bridge, and even at 7 in the morning it is operating at full intensity. Omnibuses, carts, A wagon piled with coal sacks moving at the centre of the road, with the confidence of something too large to be argued with. Hansom cabs threading through the gaps with a recklessness that suggests either great skill or deep fatalism. Pedestrians occupying whatever space is left, which is not much. The noise is remarkable. Hooves, wheels, voices, a distant hammer from somewhere in the direction of Southwark Bridge. A dog that has found something interesting in the gutter and is defending it against a second dog with passionate and theatrical commitment. Your omnibus stop is at the corner near the Borough Market. You stand there for 4 minutes in the fog and the noise, your collar pressing against your jaw, your hands in your coat pockets, watching the morning city do its morning city things. A coffee stall is set up on the opposite corner, operated by a man whose face is the specific brown red of someone who stood in all weathers over a fire for many years, and the smell of the coffee reaches you across the street, dense and warm and complicated, the kind of smell that makes the cold feel more manageable. You cannot stop for coffee. Coffee is a penny, which is a penny you have not budgeted for. This is the arithmetic of 7 shillings a week. You've allocated every penny before you earn it, and there is no room in the allocation for a penny's worth of warmth on a foggy October morning. The omnibus arrives. It is a horse-drawn omnibus, a large open-topped vehicle with an inside compartment for 12 passengers and an outside deck for those willing to sit in the weather for the slightly reduced fare. You go inside. Inside costs 2p from the Borough to Holborn. Outside costs a penny. You have 3 weeks' worth of information about what being cold and damp does to the points of a starched collar, and the answer is nothing that helps your case. The inside of the omnibus smells of damp wool and tobacco, and the specific compressed warmth of too many people in too small a space. You squeeze in beside a man who smells of soap and something industrial, paint, possibly, or varnish, and a woman who is reading a pamphlet and appears entirely unaware that anyone else exists. The conductor takes your 2p. The omnibus lurches into movement. This is your commute. Every morning, every evening, Tabard Street to London Bridge to Fleet Street to Fetter Lane, roughly 4 miles, roughly 40 minutes depending on the traffic. Enough time to watch the city wake up and to feel the collar tighten, incrementally, as the day's heat begins to build. Because this is the thing about the collar that nobody explains to you before you put it on for the first time. The tightness is not static. The collar begins the day at a certain degree of discomfort, which is already present, already noted, and this degree increases as the hours pass. Not because the collar itself changes, the starch keeps its rigidity with admirable commitment, but because you change. The body generates heat, the neck generates heat. The collar, pressed against warm skin all day, begins to impart that warmth back. By mid-morning, the linen against your throat is blood-warm. By mid-afternoon, it is slightly damp at the inner edge, where the skin and the starch have been having a long conversation about whose territory this is. By early evening, when you are finally on the omnibus home and have been upright and collared for 10 or 11 hours, the sensation around your throat has progressed from pressure to something you might honestly describe as insistence. A continuous low-grade assertion of presence. It does not hurt. You want to be precise about this. It does not cause pain in any acute or dramatic sense, but it is always there. Every breath registers it, every swallow, every slight unconscious movement of the head that the collar intercepts and redirects. It is a constant reminder of the distance between the body you have and the body the job requires. Across the river now, London Bridge, with the Thames below it, and the fog sitting on the water so thick this morning that you can barely see the far bank, just the shapes of masts rising out of the white, a forest of them, the ships at their moorings in the Pool of London. Even through the omnibus windows and the fog, the river has its smell, cold salt and mud and something ancient, something that has been collecting in these reaches for 2,000 years of occupation and commerce, and the slow, patient accumulation of a city. The Thames in October smells like the earth itself is being wrung out. You watch it until the bridge is passed and you are in the city, the financial heart of London, the square mile of banks and counting houses and insurers and solicitors and clerks, the administrative machinery of an empire, all of it requiring the daily attendance of thousands of men in dark suits and white collars, all of them in movement now through the morning streets, all of them with their chins held up and their necks encased in starch. You are one of them, or you are becoming one of them. The distinction feels important. Fetter Lane is a narrow street running between Fleet Street and Holborn, old London stock, the kind of street that has been a street since before anyone thought to write down the names of streets. The buildings lean toward each other overhead. The cobbles are uneven. In the summer it smells of horse and ink. In October it smells of horse and ink and coal smoke and the wet stone of old walls. Number 14 is a 4-storey building with a painted sign in the first-floor window. Kettleworth, Mapes and Harbury, solicitors. Established 1841. The sign is painted in a black copper plate that suggests gravity and continuity. The building itself suggests that it was built to last and has been lasting, with diminishing enthusiasm for several decades. You go in. The ground floor is occupied by Kettleworth's managing clerk, Mr. Craddock, who's been with the firm since before you were born, and who regards new junior clerks with the steady, watchful equanimity of a man who has seen many junior clerks and found most of them wanting. Mr. Craddock is 60 years old and has the posture of a man 20 years younger, because Mr. Craddock has been wearing collars for 40 years and has achieved what you are told is possible, but have not yet managed to believe: a complete and unconscious integration of the collar into his physical self. He does not appear to notice it. He sits at his high desk and writes in a neat small hand, and his collar sits around his neck like an extension of his skeleton, like a part of him that has always been there. And when he turns to look at you arriving 2 minutes before 8 o'clock, his chin does not register any discomfort at the movement. You take your place at the desk in the back room. The back room holds 3 junior clerks. Yourself, a boy named Archibald Finch, who is 17 and has been here for 5 months, and has therefore developed a slight but palpable condescension toward you, and a thin, quiet man of about 30 named Herbert Graves, who has been a junior clerk for 11 years, and about whom there are a number of things that are never discussed. Your desks are arranged in a row facing the wall, at high writing desks sitting on high stools. The design of the Victorian counting house and the Victorian solicitor's office is a design built around the assumption that the human body will be maintained in an approximately vertical position for the duration of the working day, and the desks and stools reinforce this assumption at every point. You sit down, you open the ledger assigned to you, you pick up your pen. The collar presses against your throat as you look down at the page. The history of the collar is, underneath its apparent absurdity, the history of a very serious idea. The idea that cleanliness is visible, and that visible cleanliness is the same as virtue. That the body can be made to communicate its owner's character through the management of its surface. that the distance between a man who appears well-ordered and a man who is well-ordered is, for all practical social purposes, zero. The collar didn't begin with the Victorians. It goes back further, much further, to a moment in the 16th century when ruffs, great cartwheel arrangements of starched and pleated linen, began to appear around the necks of European aristocracy. The ruff was an extraordinary piece of engineering, layers of linen fabric pleated into figure-8 loops, built up into a structure that could be 8 inches or more from neck to outer edge, starched with a paste made from wheat starch and sometimes tinted blue or yellow with starch dyed with specific minerals, propped on wire frames called support asses when the thing got too large to hold its own shape. The ruff communicated with absolute efficiency a single piece of social information. This person does not work with their hands, because the ruff made it essentially impossible to work with your hands. You could not lean forward. You could not bend down. You could not do anything that required physical effort without immediately and catastrophically soiling the elaborate construction around your neck. The ruff was, in this sense, a piece of negative evidence. It proved what you weren't. The starch required for the ruff was its own entire industry. Starch had been made from wheat for centuries, but ruffs drove demand into a different order of magnitude altogether. Starch makers set up near the grain markets, laundresses who specialised in rough work, starching, setting, folding, pressing the pleats into position, became skilled practitioners commanding skilled wages. The process required hot irons, starch paste at exactly the right consistency and temperature, and a degree of manual dexterity that took years to develop. Get it wrong, and you had a limp, grey, embarrassing disaster around someone's neck. Get it right, and you had 2 inches of perfect white architecture, rigid and gleaming, that would hold its shape for a full day of being looked at. The ruffs eventually disappeared, collapsed by their own excess, replaced in the 17th century by the falling collar, softer, lace-edged, lying flat on the shoulders, and then by the cravat and the stock and the various other neck arrangements that occupied the 18th century. But the fundamental logic didn't disappear. The neck remained the site of social information. The thing around a man's neck remained the most immediate visible signal of who he was and what he could afford, and specifically whether he could afford to have someone else manage the labour of keeping it clean, because that's what it's really about. The collar is not primarily about the person wearing it. It is primarily about the person who washes it. You think about this sometimes in the back room at Kettleworth, Mapes and Harbury, during the long sections of the afternoon when you're copying figures from one ledger to another, and the work does not require enough of your mind to prevent the rest of it from wandering. You think about what it means that the central symbol of respectability in 1884 is a piece of cloth that requires, by design, to be made dirty and then cleaned over and over as rapidly as possible in order to maintain its function. A collar worn all day accumulates skin cells, oil from the skin, the invisible residue of breathing and sweating and existing in a body, the visible evidence of eating and walking and existing in London's air. By the end of the working day, the inside of the collar band, the part that has been against your skin all day, bears a pale brownish ring, a ghost of the day's effort. This ring must be removed before the collar can be worn again. This removal is not your problem. This is by design. This is the whole point. Your collars go to the laundry every Monday morning. You have 4 of them. 4 collars, which is the minimum respectable number, allowing you to have 1 being worn, 1 clean and ready, and 2 at the laundry, and they go to a woman called Mrs. Parks, who operates out of a basement 2 streets from the boarding house, and who does collars at 2pence each. 4 collars, therefore 8pence per week, which is a significant fraction of your resources, but which is not optional, any more than paying for omnibus fare is optional. Mrs. Parks is not a laundress in the sense of a woman who takes in general washing. She does collars and cuffs specifically. This is a specialisation. The collar and cuff trade is its own economy, with its own practitioners, its own geography within the city, its own logic. You don't send your collars to a general laundry because a general laundry, if you want the collar to come back in usable condition, requires a specific knowledge of starch concentration, of iron temperature, of the sequence in which a starched collar must be worked. The starch applied while slightly damp, the iron at the right heat, not too hot, or the starch burns and the collar yellows and is ruined, not too cool, or it doesn't set properly. The collar then left to cool in its shaped state, then pressed a second time for the final finish. It is a process. Mrs. Parks knows the process. This is why she is paid 2pence per collar. You have never been to Mrs. Parks's basement, actually. You have handed the bundle of collars at the door to a girl of perhaps 12 or 13, who takes them with a gravity appropriate to something being entrusted to her, and you collect them on Wednesday evening, clean and pressed and back in their shapes, with the faint particular smell of fresh starch that is the smell of readiness, of preparation, of Monday morning approaching with its requirements. But you know, in the way you know things that are too uncomfortable to look at directly, what the basement looks like. Because you grew up 2 miles from here and you have been in those kinds of basements. The big zinc tub, the copper for boiling, the wooden mangles with their heavy rollers, the ironing board, a smooth plank padded with layers of cloth, and the flat irons heating in the fire or on a special stand over a gas flame, and the way you test the heat of the iron, you spit on it, and the spit's behaviour tells you the temperature, the way the steam rises when a hot iron meets damp linen, the way your arms and shoulders feel after 4 or 5 hours of this, and the way they feel after 12, the skin of a laundress's hands after years of work, reddened, roughened, resistant to the world in a specific and particular way. Mrs. Parks has those hands. You noticed them when you first knocked on her door with your bundle of collars. She has the hands of a woman who has been managing other people's cleanliness since she was old enough to carry an iron. She charged you 2pence per collar and didn't ask what firm you worked for and didn't look at you as if she cared one way or another. To Mrs. Parks, your 4 collars every Monday morning and 8pence every Wednesday evening, and there is nothing else about you that is relevant. This is a fair description of the relationship, but here is the thing you do not let yourself think about for too long, because it leads somewhere uncomfortable. Mrs. Parkey's labour, her specific skill, her early morning start and late night finish, her particular knowledge of starch chemistry and iron temperature, and the exact degree of humidity that allows a collar to be worked properly, all of that labour is invisible. Not invisible in the sense of being undetected, but invisible in the social sense of being beneath notice. The collar itself is the thing that matters. The collar is the signal, the communication, the evidence of status. The collar's existence implies someone cleaned it without also implying or requiring you to think about the person who did the cleaning. This is the design. This is what the collar is for. You copy figures from one ledger to another. Your pen scratches across the paper. Your collar presses against your throat. Outside, fetter lane is getting on with its day, let me tell you about the starch. Laundry starch in 1884 is made from several things. Wheat starch, the most common, made by steeping wheat grains in water and then separating the starch granules from the gluten and bran. Rice starch, which produces a harder, shinier finish. Potato starch sometimes, and a newer arrival, already beginning to change things. A commercial starch preparation called Coleman's, which comes in a blue and yellow cardboard box and is already establishing itself in the laundry industry with the confidence of a thing that knows its future is secure. But before the starch is applied, the collar must be washed. The ring of daily accumulation must be removed. This means the collar goes first into the wash tub, hot water, yellow soap, and manual agitation. The laundress's hands, knuckles working the fabric against itself, working out the grey ring, the grease, the city's invisible contribution to the interior surface of someone's respectability. This is the part that destroys the hands. The combination of hot water and soap, repeated daily for years. The skin cracks. The knuckles split in cold weather. In winter, the hands of a laundress who does collar work can bleed at the creases of the joints, from the combination of constant wetness and the cold air they're plunged into when she carries things to the outdoor pump. Then the rinse, then the starch. The starch is mixed with water. The exact proportion matters. This is where the skill lives, and heated in a pot over the fire until it reaches a thick, semi-transparent consistency, like very thin porridge, but glossy. The collar is dipped in this mixture, or the mixture is applied with a brush, depending on the starch worker's preference. Then it is partially dried, worked while still damp, and then the iron comes into contact with it, and this is where starch becomes architecture. The heat changes the starch. The starch granules, when heated in water, swell and burst and release their content into the surrounding liquid. When this liquid dries and is then pressed with heat, it sets hard. Not hard like bone or metal, not that kind of rigidity, but hard like paper, like card, like the inside of a book's cover, crisp, resistant. The fabric of the collar, which is in its natural state a soft, pliable linen, becomes, through this process, something with the structural integrity to stand independently, to hold its points upright, to maintain its shape against the movements of a human body for a full working day. This is what the iron does. This is why the iron temperature matters so much. Too cool. The starch doesn't set. The collar comes out soft and limp, and this is not acceptable. A limp collar is worse than no collar, because it implies you tried and failed, which is a specific category of disgrace. Too hot. The starch scorches. It turns from white to faintly yellow, then to a pale brown. At the outer edges, the collar, where the iron must travel across the surface in careful passes, a too hot iron leaves a faint brown line that looks, when you hold the collar up to the light, exactly like what it is. A failure. A burnt collar cannot be worn. It must be washed again, the starch removed, the process begun from the beginning. Mrs. Parks does not burn collars. She has not burned a collar in 20 years of this work. She knows by the weight of the iron in her hand, by something she would be unable to fully articulate, exactly when it is ready. She lifts it from the fire stand, holds it near her cheek. The skin near the cheek is sensitive to heat, in a way the palm isn't. And then it goes to the collar, quick, firm, even passes. The starch hissing slightly where the iron passes over it, giving off its particular smell, a clean smell, a starch smell. The smell of heat and wheat and the beginning of something. You wear that smell every morning. In the back room of Kettleworth, Mapes and Harbury, your morning consists of copying. This is what a junior clerk does. He copies things. Figures from draft documents into clean ledgers, letters from rough notes into the fair copy that will go to clients, records of transactions from one format into another format required by a different part of the legal process. The work is precise and requires concentration and produces, over the course of a morning, a specific kind of mental fatigue. The fatigue of a mind that has been doing careful, necessary, unrewarding work for several hours. Not the tiredness of difficulty, but the flatness of repetition. Your hand moves across the paper, the pen scratches. Archibald Finch at the next desk copies with a slightly self-conscious precision that you've decided, perhaps uncharitably, represents an ambition to impress rather than a genuine standard of accuracy. Herbert Graves, at the far end, copies with the speed and economy of someone who has been doing this for 11 years and no longer experiences it as copying so much as a physical process, the way breathing is a physical process, automatic and largely unnoticed. Mr. Craddock comes through once in the morning. He doesn't speak to you directly. He looks at your work from behind your shoulder, picks up the ledger, turns a page, replaces it, and walks out. You have no idea whether this is approval or preparation for a conversation you haven't had yet. Sidney, when you described this to him, said it means nothing. Craddock does it to everyone, Sidney said. He's not reading it. He's checking the handwriting. If it looks like a drunk wrote it, you'd know. Your handwriting is good. You spent 2 years working on it specifically because you understood that this was going to be how your future was judged, in large part. The quality of the writing on a page, not the thoughts. The physical rendering of the thoughts, another form of surfaces. By 10 o'clock the collar has been on your neck for 3 hours. The sensation has progressed from the initial cool pressure to something warmer, softer at the edges, the starch beginning to absorb the slight moisture from your skin. The pressure is the same. The pressure is always the same, but the texture changes. In the morning the collar feels like an external object. By mid-morning it begins to feel more like a second skin, and this is in some ways more uncomfortable than the pressure, because a second skin implies integration, implies ownership, implies that you and the collar are becoming the same thing. This is what Sidney means when he says it will loosen by noon. He doesn't mean this starch loosens. He means your awareness loosens. Your body decides to stop fighting what it can't change. You accommodate. You don't find this comforting. At 11, there is a brief intermission in the copying because Mr. Craddock sends you to the post office on Fleet Street with a bundle of letters. This is also what junior clerks do. They carry things. Letters, parcels, documents that must be delivered by hand to other offices, messages between solicitors that cannot, for various reasons, be entrusted to the normal postal delivery. This is not undignified work. It is necessary work. But it is work that takes you out of the office and into the street, which is the part of the day you look forward to most. Not because the street is pleasant, but because the street is moving and the office is still, and the body, after 3 hours at a high desk, has opinions about the distinction. Fleet Street is the street of newspapers. That is its primary identity in 1884, although it has been other things in earlier times, the street of lawyers, the street of printers more generally, but by now it is most powerfully the street where the great newspapers of London are produced in their large buildings with their underground presses and their perpetual urgency. The Daily Chronicle at one end, the Daily Telegraph further along, the offices of several others. Even now, at 11 in the morning, the street smells faintly of the ink and paper, and the particular hot metal smell of type being set and presses running. A smell that has been baked into the buildings and the air above the street for so many years, it can no longer be said to belong to any individual building. You walk quickly, because the letters need to be posted before the midday collection, and because walking fast is one of the ways to manage the collar. Motion creates a certain internal focus, a decision by the body to attend to locomotion rather than peripheral discomfort. You weave through the pedestrian traffic on the pavement, step around a man who is standing at a newsagent's window reading the headline board. Tidings from the Sudan, very large lettering. Below it something smaller about Gladstone, and you are at the post office. The post office smells of paper and dust and the particular smell of a public building in 1884. Slightly damp, slightly stale, with an undertone of old wood and the accumulated human presence of thousands of people who have stood in this space over the years. You hand in the letters, receive the receipts, turn around. On the way back you pass a shop window that stops you for a moment. A haberdasher's, one of the good ones, with a carefully dressed window displaying collars of various types. The stand-up, the wing, the fold-down, the Gladstone, the Piccadilly. They are arranged on velvet, fanned out slightly, white against the dark background. Around them, like planets in orbit, the accessories that attend them, collar studs in silver and in cheaper metals, collar boxes of white cardboard for storage and transport, collar bags of linen for the laundry. The central item is a collar displayed on a false neck, a wooden form shaped to suggest the upper chest and throat without suggesting anything else about the person who might wear it. A neck of ideal proportions, a neck that is neither too thick nor too thin, a neck that is, in the language of this particular display, merely an opportunity. The collar on the wooden neck is a high-standing wing collar, the points folded down, the kind worn with a cravat or a bow tie, the kind that says, "I have made a decision about who I am, and I have expressed this decision through neckwear." The collar is displayed flat, but you know from experience what it becomes when it is on a neck. It becomes an architecture. It becomes a frame for the face above it, directing the gaze upward, insisting on the chin being held level, requiring the head to be maintained at the angle appropriate for someone who has arranged the world below them, not someone who is navigating it. Above the collar display a sign, J. Hobbs and Son, Hosiers and Outfitters, established 1849. Collars, cuffs and neckwear of every description. Below, in smaller print, the newest celluloid collars and cuffs, unbreakable, washable, superior finish, from 6D each, celluloid. The word arrives in your awareness with a slight, indefinable sensation, like a door opening onto a room you haven't been inside yet. You have heard about celluloid collars. Sydney has one. He showed it to you in the first week, and you held it in your hands and turned it over and were struck by its quality. Lighter than linen, with a glossy, slightly plastic surface. A bright, definitive white that does not absorb ambient light but reflects it. You flexed it between your hands the way you'd test a piece of card, and it gave slightly, resisted, came back to its shape. Never gets limp, Sydney said. Never needs starching. You just wipe it. Damp cloth. Done. What does it feel like? Like a collar, Sydney said, with the particular flatness of a man who finds your question tedious. It does feel like a collar, but it also feels like something else. something that is trying to be a collar while not quite being of the same world as a collar. The linen collar is a textile object, continuous with the history of textiles, woven and sewn and processed into its current form through labour that stretches back through centuries of human practice with fibre and heat and water. The celluloid collar is something new. It is manufactured from a different set of processes, from cellulose, cotton or wood pulp, treated with nitric acid and camphor, extruded, pressed, cut into shapes. It is the product of chemistry and industrial machinery more than it is the product of craft. It is also, and this is the fact you're not thinking about while you look at the display in Mr. Hobbs's window, highly flammable. You go back to work. The afternoon passes in the way afternoons at a solicitor's office pass, with the slow accumulation of completed tasks and the faint background anxiety of tasks not yet completed, all of it under the fluorescent pressure of the collar, which by 2:30 has achieved its maximum daily level of personal attention. Your neck is warm. The inside edge of the collar is damp against the skin. You have been at your desk for 6 hours with breaks totaling perhaps 20 minutes, and your body has a number of things it would like to discuss with you, and the collar is the most vocal of them. You copy a long schedule of property receipts into a clean ledger. Your handwriting is steady. Your collar presses against your throat. The afternoon light, what there is of it through the grimy windows on this foggy October day, is already beginning to lose its thin conviction. At 4 o'clock, Mr. Craddock comes in with a client. This is unusual. The back room where the junior clerks work is not a client space. Clients are received by Mr. Craddock in the front office, or they go upstairs to see Mr. Mapes or Mr. Harbury. The senior partners occupy the upper floors with their good carpets and their good chairs and their good manners, and the firm's real dealings happen up there. The back room with its row of copying desks is infrastructure, but the client today is not going upstairs. The client today is a man in his 50s, heavy set with a dark coat and a face of the particular ruddy completeness you associate with men who spend a good deal of time either outdoors or eating. He is accompanied by a young man, younger than you, possibly 16 or 17, who hangs back in the doorway with the expression of someone who would very much prefer to be somewhere else but hasn't been given a choice. Mr. Craddock does not introduce them. He goes to the filing cabinet in the corner, extracts a document, examines it, returns it, extracts another. The client watches. The young man in the doorway looks at his feet. You look at the young man's collar. You cannot help it. The collar has become, over 3 weeks, the thing you look at first. It is involuntary, like the way people who have recently broken an arm cannot stop looking at other people's arms. The young man in the doorway is wearing a collar, obviously. He's accompanying his father to a solicitor's office. This is a formal occasion, but his collar is slightly too large for him. The points gap at the front where the collar band doesn't quite meet the shirt neck band. The starch is correct, firm, white, but the fit is wrong, and the fit being wrong tells you things about his situation that he would prefer you not to know, that this is not his collar, or not a collar bought for him specifically, or that he has grown recently. A sudden vertical growth that has left him wearing the old size while the new size hasn't yet been acquired. He stands in the doorway with his chin held at the angle the collar demands, which is slightly too high for a collar that doesn't fit, and the result is a posture of mild, inadvertent arrogance that is clearly costing him some effort to maintain. You look away. You go back to your copying, but the image stays with you, the way small, precise images do. The boy in the doorway, the collar too large, the chin held up against the gap. The client and his son leave. Mr. Craddock goes back to the front office. Archibald Finch, with the satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for permission to have an opinion, says, "The collar didn't fit him." "I noticed," you say. "His father should." "I noticed," you say again, and the flatness in your voice surprises Archibald Finch into silence, and you go back to your figures. The reason the collar has to fit is not aesthetic. Well, it is aesthetic. The wrong-sized collar looks wrong, and looking wrong is a kind of failure in a world where surfaces are read constantly and comprehensively. But it is also functional. A collar that doesn't fit correctly doesn't maintain the pressure evenly around the neck, which means that the pressure, instead of being distributed, concentrates at the points of contact. A collar too tight at the front and loose at the back applies its pressure at 2 points rather than around a circumference, and this is when the discomfort becomes something closer to pain. And a collar too tight over the carotid artery, the great blood vessel that runs up the side of the neck close to the skin, applies pressure to the circulation of blood to and from the brain. The carotid artery is located in the male neck, approximately where the collar sits. This is not a coincidence, in the sense that the collar's placement is dictated by the anatomy of the neck, and therefore must necessarily be placed near the major blood vessels and nerves. It is not a design choice. It is a consequence. But it is a consequence with consequences, and the consequence of consequences is this. A collar that's too tight, through wrong fit, through excessive starch, through the addition of heat and sweat and the small movements of the day, can apply enough pressure to the carotid artery to affect cerebral blood flow. Not in a healthy young man sitting upright at a desk. In a healthy young man sitting upright at a desk, the body compensates, the blood pressure adjusts, the heart works slightly harder, and the blood gets where it needs to go. The collar is uncomfortable. The collar is not lethal. Not today. But take that young man, make him older, give him 40 years of wearing collars, and along with it, give him the 40 years of gin and port and Sunday joints and insufficient exercise that characterize a certain trajectory through Victorian professional life. Give him a neck that has become softer in the vascular architecture, arteries less elastic, blood pressure irregular. Then put him in a dining chair after a good meal, with a glass of something in his hand and a warmth at his back from the fireplace. And let the meal and the warmth and the wine and the accumulated fatigue of 60-odd years do what they do. Let his chin drop. Let the collar that was holding his head up now hold his head slightly down, pressing slightly differently against the carotid. Let the blood pressure fluctuate. Let the years of gin and port do their quiet work on the vascular wall. Let the body pursue sleep with the single-minded persistence of a body that has been refused sleep all evening by the requirements of polite company. And sometimes, in this sequence of events, the man does not wake up. Apoplexy, the coroner writes. Vater murder, the Germans wrote, as far back as the 1820s, when the collars were even higher and stiffer, when they rose 6 or 7 inches from the shoulder and enclosed the neck like a siege weapon. The father killer, named, according to some accounts, for an actual case, an actual father found in his chair, though which father and whose account this is are questions that the historical record has chosen not to answer. You are thinking about this somewhere around 5 o'clock, when the copy before you loses focus for a moment and you realise your neck aches. Not dramatically, not in a way that suggests anything is wrong with your circulation, just the ache of a young man of 19 who's been wearing something round his neck for 9 hours and has been sitting at a high desk for most of them. a muscle ache, a postural ache, the kind that will resolve in approximately 30 seconds after you remove the collar tonight. But you're thinking about the father in the chair. You're thinking about the coroner's report. You're thinking about the distance between the thing you are wearing, which is uncomfortable and mildly ridiculous, and the thing it comes from, which is a line of increasingly extreme neckwear that began with the ruffs of the 16th century and has been narrowing toward the present with the inevitability of something that started at one absurdity and will only end at another. At 6 o'clock, Mr. Craddock comes in and says the words that have been, every evening, the equivalent of the bell at the end of the last round. "Good night, gentlemen." You and Archibald Finch and Herbert Graves all say, "Good night, Mr. Craddock," and begin to put away your work. Herbert Graves does this with the unhurried efficiency of a man who's performed this action several thousand times. Archibald Finch does it with the barely suppressed urgency of a 17-year-old who has somewhere to be. You do it with a particular mix of tiredness and relief that, after 3 weeks, you're beginning to recognize as the texture of the working day. You put on your coat. You go out into Fetter Lane, which is dark at 6 in October, the gas lamps burning, the fog still present though thinner than this morning. The omnibus stop is on Fleet Street. You walk to it, and while you walk, something interesting happens. You feel, despite the collar, despite the ache in your neck and the soreness at the collar's lower edge where it has been pressing against the top of your shirt all day, a kind of forward lean in your body. Not happiness exactly, not satisfaction, something simpler. The body's acknowledgement that the day has been survived, that you have put in the hours, done the work, maintained the surfaces, and are now in transit toward the place where the surfaces can be put away. The omnibus south is more crowded than the morning omnibus. The day's workers going home, packed into the interior, the conversation a low, tired murmur. You stand in the aisle, holding the strap, swaying with the omnibus's progress through Fleet Street, across the bridge, south toward the Borough. Through the window, the Thames appears briefly in the gap between buildings at the bridge approach. Dark now, the fog thickening over the water, the lights of the ship's lanterns making small smeared circles of yellow in the grey. Cold coming off the river even through the glass. You get off at the Borough High Street. The streets here smell different from the city. Less commerce, more domestic. The smell of cooking beginning to leak from the windows. Something fried, something boiled. A cat sits on a doorstep and watches you pass with the specific contempt of a cat for a man in a collar. Tabard Street, the boarding house, Mrs. Beale's door, up the stairs to your room. Sydney is not home yet. The room is cold and dim, the evening light barely reaching the small window, and you cross to the candle, light it, and then, this is the moment you've been moving toward for 9 hours, you reach for the collar. The front stud first, the small pressure release as it comes free, then the back stud. This one requires both hands reaching behind the neck with the slightly awkward reach of a person doing something their body wasn't quite designed for. And then the collar band comes free from the shirt and the collar is off. The sensation is not dramatic. This is what surprises you every evening. You expect release, revelation, some immediate and physical reprieve. Instead, what you get is an absence. A quiet where the pressure was. Your neck moves and nothing stops it. You tilt your head to the right and there is no collar catching the corner of your jaw. You tilt your head down toward your chest and there is no pressure at the front of your throat. You breathe again. The collar sits on the table where you put it. The same table where it sat this morning looking like a document. Now it looks like what it is. A curved piece of stiffened cloth, holding its shape because the shape has been pressed into it. Without a neck in it, it's not threatening. It's just a thing. You put your hand to your throat, where the collar has been all day. The skin is slightly raw at the back of the neck, where the collar band has been, faintly reddened where the stiff edge meets the skin at the front. You press your fingers against it and feel the slight tenderness. This is the other thing they don't tell you about the collar. After it comes off for a little while, the body doesn't know what to do with the freedom. The muscles of the neck that have been maintaining the collar's required position all day don't immediately relax. They stay tense for a few minutes, holding the head at the collar's angle, and you walk around the room with your chin still slightly up, still at the angle of someone managing a surface, until the body remembers that the surface is no longer being managed and releases. You wash your face and hands in the cold water of the basin. The water feels extraordinary against the skin around your jaw and neck. The specific pleasure of cold, clean water on skin that has been covered all day. You dry your hands, you change into your indoor clothes, a looser shirt, no collar, an old jacket. You feel, without the collar, approximately 50% lighter. This is an exaggeration. The collar weighs almost nothing. It is a few ounces of linen and starch. But the body's accounting is not of mass, it's of pressure. And the absence of pressure after 9 hours of pressure is a subtraction that feels enormous. You sit on the edge of the bed and think about eating, which is a problem to be solved in the next 20 minutes before the kitchen hours end. Mrs. Beale provides supper. It is a condition of the boarding house, one of the things you pay for, and it happens between 7 and 8 in the parlour downstairs, and consists of a rotation of meals that you have over 3 weeks, begun to learn like a calendar. Monday is a stew of indeterminate content. Tuesday is cold cuts of something from Sunday's roast, which happened at a different property of Mrs. Beale's with different lodgers, who you never see but who contribute their Sunday joint to your Tuesday supper. Wednesday is bread and cheese. Thursday is herrings. Friday is occasionally something better. Perhaps because Mrs. Beale considers Friday a kind of culmination and wants the week to end on an upswing. The Saturday and Sunday suppers you manage for yourself with whatever your remaining resources will allow, which is usually not much. Tonight's Monday. You go downstairs and eat the stew standing near the window, which is a habit you've developed in the boarding house because the collar has trained your body to prefer not to lean forward, and eating upright is easier than eating at the angle required by Mrs. Beale's low table. Sydney arrives while you're eating, comes in with a newspaper and a slight wind-burned look, takes his stew and sits at the table with the ease of a man who made his accommodation with the collar long before the collar made its accommodation with him. "Craddock let you out on time," he says. 6 exactly. "That's good." Sydney opens his newspaper. "My lot kept us till past. Something about a dispatch that had to go out." You eat. The stew is hot and thick and has potatoes in it. After a day of cold and collars, it does what it needs to do. "Sydney, your celluloid collar," he looks up. "What about it? Does it ever get hot? I mean, does the material heat up?" Sydney looks at you with the expression he uses when you ask questions he has already answered in his mind. "It's not as bad as people say," he says. "It's only dangerous if you're careless. You keep it away from naked flames, it's fine. But you keep it away from naked flames, obviously. All day. When have I ever leaned into a candle?" You think about the gas lights in the office. the candles in the boarding house, the open fires everywhere, in every hearth, in every kitchen, at every corner where a vendor has a brazier going to keep warm on a cold October morning. London in 1884 is a city of open flames. It is a city of industry operating almost entirely on combustion, on coal and gas and naked fire, on heat and light produced by burning things. And celluloid is not an ordinary material. Celluloid. The word comes from cellulose, the structural material of plant cells, and oid, meaning like. It was developed in the 1860s as a substitute for ivory. The ivory billiard ball trade was straining the supply of actual elephants, and someone in New Jersey, a man named John Wesley Hyatt, though the truth is several people arrived at similar results around the same time, worked out that if you treated cellulose with nitric and sulfuric acid and then added camphor as a plasticizer, you got a material that could be moulded, pressed, carved, and otherwise worked into a wide variety of shapes. Hard but slightly flexible, capable of a high polish, white and translucent or dyed to various colours. You could make combs from it, piano keys, billiard balls eventually, and collars. The collar and cuff trade picked up celluloid in the 1870s, and by the early 1880s it was being sold in haberdashers' windows across London as the modern alternative to linen. The advantages were real. Celluloid didn't need starching, didn't absorb sweat the way linen did, could be wiped clean, was cheaper than properly laundered linen for someone who couldn't afford to send 4 collars a week to Mrs. Parker's basement. And it looked right. The whiteness was a better white than most starched linen, a more industrial white, a white without the slight warmth that starch gives, a white that said, I have engaged with the modern. The disadvantage was chemistry. Celluloid is a nitrocellulose material. It is made from plant cellulose that has been treated with nitric acid, and nitrocellulose, at the right conditions of heat and oxygen, burns with great enthusiasm and speed. Cellulose itself burns. Nitrocellulose burns faster and less predictably. Gun cotton, the propellant used in firearms since the 1840s, is nitrocellulose. Smokeless powder is nitrocellulose. The stuff they make the collars from is nitrocellulose. You are, if you buy a celluloid collar, putting a piece of material chemically related to gun propellant around your neck. This fact is known. The haberdashers know it. The manufacturers know it. The buyers know it in the way people know things they have decided not to let interfere with their decisions, as a technical fact filed away, not quite attached to any emotional register that might alter behaviour. The celluloid collar is cheap and convenient and modern, and the chance of your collar catching fire is, in any given day, small. And so you don't think about it in the way you don't think about many small probabilities until they become large actualities. But there are fires. There are fires that are reported in the newspapers, in the small columns that report small news, in the interior pages where the minor events of the city are gathered. A man leaned over a gas lamp and his celluloid collar ignited. The fire moved fast. Celluloid burns at a rate that makes paper look cautious, and the man was badly burned before he could remove the collar. Another man, reaching past a candlestick, the same result. A woman this time. She was not wearing the collar herself, she was ironing one, and the iron was too hot, and the material reached its ignition temperature, and the fire moved from the collar to the ironing cloth to the basket on the shelf beside it, and the fire brigade was called. Nobody in these reports died, or if they did, it was classified as something else. In later years, the 1880s becoming the 1890s, the 1890s becoming the century's end, There will be enough of these incidents to generate a whole unofficial category of story. Firemen will begin to recognize the particular smell of burning celluloid, a sweet chemical smell, not entirely unpleasant, the kind of smell that deceives you for a moment before you understand what it is. Hospitals in large cities will treat burns to the face and neck and upper chest with the particular pattern that comes from a collar fire, a pattern that is different from other burn patterns because it follows the architecture of what was being worn. But you are getting ahead of yourself. It's 1884, and you're sitting in Mrs. Beale's parlour, eating Monday stew, discussing the relative merits of your boarding-house companion's neckwear, while the collar that has imprisoned your neck for 9 hours sits on the table upstairs waiting for Tuesday. The week passes the way weeks pass when you are new to something that is becoming routine. It is both faster and slower than it seems like it should be. Faster because each day is a repetition of the previous one in its broad structure. Wake, dress, collar, omnibus, copy, omnibus, remove collar, eat, sleep. And repetition has an accelerating quality. The first time you do something taking the longest, and each repetition thereafter compressing slightly. Slower because you're still learning all of it, every day presenting some new variant of the problem, some new way in which the collar or the city or the work surprises you. On Tuesday there is a moment in the afternoon when Archibald Finch, reaching for a reference volume from the shelf behind his desk, knocks his inkwell. The inkwell falls. Black ink spreads across the surface of the desk and down the front of his waistcoat and catches, at the collar's lower edge, the cuff of his left sleeve. Archibald Finch freezes in the way people freeze when a small disaster is still being assessed, and has not yet been fully converted from an event into consequence. Herbert Graves, without looking up, holds out a cloth. Archibald Finch takes the cloth and presses it against the inkwell, which has not shattered but is rolling toward the desk's edge with unhurried momentum, and catches it, and dabs at his waistcoat and looks at his cuff. The cuff is ruined. The ink stain at the collar's edge is smaller but present. Both will have to go to the laundry. Both will have to be checked after washing to see if the stain has lifted, and if not, and ink stains, particularly India ink, are not always persuaded by laundry, replaced. The replacement cost of a cuff is 3p. A collar, 4p or 5p for a good linen one. A ruined collar is not a catastrophe in the monetary sense. It is a minor setback, easily absorbed. But the experience of a ruined collar, or a stained collar, or a collar that has in any way failed to maintain its surface, is not purely financial. The stained collar is a legible object. It tells a story. The story it tells is, something went wrong here. Something escaped control. Mr. Craddock appears in the doorway with the timing of someone who has developed, through decades, an instinct for inconvenient moments. He surveys the scene, the open inkwell in Archibald Finch's hand, the stained waistcoat, the cloth. His expression does not change. He says, "Clean it up," and returns to the front office. This is Mr. Craddock's management style, instruction without elaboration. It is efficient. It communicates, without wasting any words, that the state of the office and the people in it is a performance that must be maintained, and that a disruption in the performance is to be resolved as quickly as possible and not referred to again. You hand Archibald Finch the second cloth you keep in your desk drawer. You keep it there specifically for spillages. This is something Sidney told you to do after his own early incident with the tipped inkwell, and Archibald Finch takes it and says nothing and turns back to his desk. Herbert Graves still has not looked up. This is also you're beginning to understand information about Herbert Graves. A man who has spent 11 years in this back room has developed a capacity for absorption, a talent for continuing regardless of what happens around him. That is either a form of extreme professionalism or a form of protection from the knowledge that he is 30 years old and still copying, still here, still a junior clerk. You have caught yourself, occasionally, watching Herbert Graves's pen moving across the page and trying to understand what, if anything, he is thinking about. His face reveals almost nothing. His body at the high desk is a model of sustained application. His collar is always correct. His handwriting is immaculate. He is, in every visible way, a perfectly calibrated professional instrument. But he has been here for 11 years. This thought, when it comes, arrives with a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. On Wednesday, you collect your collars from Mrs. Parks. The girl who answers the door this time is older than the one from last week, perhaps 15 or 16, and she has the same roughened hands, the same stoic quality around the eyes. She hands you the package of 4 collars wrapped in brown paper, white and stiff and properly shaped, with the starch smell and the particular closed-case smell of freshly prepared linen. 2d each, she says. It is not a question. It is a recitation. Thank you, you say, handing over the 8d. She takes the coins, notes them, goes back inside. The door closes. You stand on the step for a moment with your package of 4 collars, listening to sounds from the basement below. The sound of water, of something being wrung, a brief sharp sound that might be the thud of a wooden mangle handle. Sounds from below the surface, from below where you're standing, from the production infrastructure of your respectable appearance. You walk home. The laundry trade of Victorian London is not one industry but several, layered on top of each other like strata of rock. At the top, or rather at the most expensive end, are the commercial laundries, the large establishments with mechanical equipment, steam power, long wooden tables with dozens of women working side by side. These handle the institutional business, hotel linen, hospital linen, the large quantities of fabric that high-volume establishments require washed and returned quickly. Then the domestic service laundresses, employed within large households, working in the basement laundry with its copper boilers and drying horses, managing the family's entire textile life. Then the independent laundresses and washerwomen, the ones who work from their own homes or small basement premises, taking in work piecemeal, their business built from neighbourhood relationships and the specific skills they've developed over years. Mrs. Parks is in this last category. She is one of thousands of women across London who do this work, in conditions that range from adequate to genuinely terrible, for wages that range from sustaining to barely not starving. The collar and cuff trade that she specialises in sits at a slightly higher point of this spectrum than pure washing. The starch work requires skill. The skill justifies a premium. The premium makes the difference between rent and eviction. Mrs. Parks has been doing this for... You don't know how long. You've never asked her. She was doing it when you found her, and from the look of her, she's been doing it for a long time. What you do know from growing up in Bermondsey and spending your childhood in and around the small domestic economies that keep working-class London running is roughly what the daily life of a collar laundress looks like. It starts early, because the drying and the ironing require daylight, and the work itself requires time before the morning collection point. 5 a.m. is not unusual. 4 in busy periods. You light the fire under the copper boiler. You fill it from the water supply, a standpipe in the yard, or if you're in a basement, possibly a pump in the court outside, depending on where in the city you are and what year you're in, and whether the water company has yet run its pipes to your street, which in 1884 in many parts of London it has not. You heat the water. While it heats, you set out your work surfaces. A laundress doing collar work has a different setup from a laundress doing general washing. The collar and cuff work requires a smoother surface, a higher temperature of the starch set, a more precise iron control. The irons she uses are shaped specifically for collar work, smaller, lighter, designed to navigate around the points and the curve of the collar band. There is a goffering iron, a cylindrical heated rod, for working the front folds of certain collar types into their characteristic shapes. There are collar stands, turned wooden forms shaped like a neck, on which the freshly starched and pressed collar is placed to cool and set in shape. A woman doing this work in a productive week might process 30 or 40 collars. More if she's very fast, very practiced. Each collar generates tuppence. 30 collars is 5 shillings. This is a week's wages in a trade that requires skill, equipment, fuel, water, and approximately 60 hours of physical labour. It is not poverty in the most extreme sense. There are laundresses who earn less. But it is marginal in the way that most working-class London incomes are marginal. Adequate when nothing goes wrong, inadequate when something does. When something goes wrong, the copper boiler springs a leak, an iron cracks or loses its handle, a collar is accidentally burned and must be replaced, a child is sick and needs attending. The winter is cold enough that the pipes freeze and the water supply fails for 3 days, which means 3 days of no work, which means 3 days of no income, which means the rent calculation for next week changes in a way that has consequences. These are not hypothetical risks. These are the recurring events of the working life. You know this. You grew up with this arithmetic. Your mother had this arithmetic. Your father had a different version of it. The tannery version, with its own set of broken equipment and sick children and frozen winters, but the same fundamental structure. A narrow margin, a life lived close to the edge of the margin, and the constant, daily, never fully articulated awareness of how small the gap is between functional and falling. The collar you wear is the product of a life like that. The whiteness that signals your respectability at 14 Fetter Lane is maintained by a woman in a basement at 5 in the morning, and the tuppence that passes between you every Wednesday is the bridge between her life and yours, and the bridge is narrow enough that you try not to think too hard about what it's built on. Friday comes, and with it wages day. You are paid 7 shillings, which is a quantity of money that manages to be simultaneously more than nothing and less than enough. You count it out on the corner of your desk after Mr. Craddock hands you the envelope. Archibald Finch gets 8 shillings, you have noted, which is because Archibald Finch came in with a reference from his father's solicitor, whereas you came in with the reference from your evening school headmaster, and these are not equivalent currencies, and you do the weekly arithmetic. 4 and 6pence for the boarding house, including supper, 8pence for the laundry, 2pence for the omnibus each way, 10 days a week, which is 3 shillings and 4pence. This leaves you, if the arithmetic is correct, approximately 4pence for all other expenditure, which includes any food beyond what Mrs. Beale provides, any essential clothing repair or replacement, any contribution to the church collection if you attend church on Sunday, any entertainment, any unexpected cost, any small purchase that is not already accounted for. 4pence. You sit at your desk with the coins in your hand and think about fourpence. The collar costs fourpence to launder per week. You have already assigned that expenditure. Fourpence is what remains after the collar has been paid for, along with everything else. This means that the collar's maintenance cost exactly consumes your entire discretionary income. The clean collar and your financial freedom have the same value. Approximately nothing. This does not seem like the intended lesson. And yet, you're a junior clerk at a solicitor's firm. You are 19. You wear a collar. The collar marks you in the taxonomy of visible surfaces that Victorian London reads automatically and constantly as a person who works with his mind, as a person of the desk and pen class, which is above the hands and muscle class that your father occupies, above the outdoor labour class that built the railways and sewer works and bridges that you cross every day. You are, in the language of your collar, a different kind of person from the people you came from. But in the language of fourpence, you are not different at all. The week proceeds, Saturday comes half day, the office closing at 1. You take the omnibus home, remove your collar, change your clothes, and spend the afternoon doing the things that the week has deferred, writing a letter to your mother, mending a small tear in the elbow of your second-best jacket, taking your boots to the cobbler at the end of the street because the sole of the right one is beginning to separate at the toe, which will need a dressing before the winter wet makes it critical. The cobbler, a man of about 60 with enormous forearms and a face of the specific compressed satisfaction of someone who has done one thing for many years and done it excellently, examines your boot with the attention of a doctor examining a patient. He turns it over. He presses the sole. He looks at the upper, the welt, the heel. Tuesday, he says, I need them for Monday. Monday evening, he says, which is not a concession. It is a counter-offer, and you accept it because the cobbler sets the terms for the cobbler's work, and this is how things are. You walk home in your indoor shoes, which are older and softer and considerably more comfortable than the boots. And as you walk through the Saturday afternoon streets of Southwark, you feel, without the collar and with the soft shoes and the loose jacket and the absence of the Fetter Lane context, like someone who might be almost any version of himself. The weak structure has been lifted. You're not yet Thomas Harlow, junior clerk. You're not yet Thomas Harlow, son of the leather yard. You are a young man of 19 walking through London on a Saturday afternoon in the soft shoes, and the future is not decided yet, and even the collar sitting upstairs on its table seems less inevitable from here. The streets on Saturday afternoon have a different quality from the weekday streets. There are more women out, more children, more errand running, more small commerce. The food stalls are out in full. The baked potato man at the corner of the high street, his tin box smelling of hot starch and salt. The pie stall near the market. A woman selling watercress from a basket, calling it in a voice pitched for carrying over traffic noise. 2 men arguing good-naturedly outside a pub, their voices overlapping in the way arguments become performances when they're not really arguments. You buy a baked potato for a halfpenny because the fourpence discretionary budget has been recalculated with the boot repair subtracted and the remaining sum divided, and a halfpenny of it assigned to the category of Saturday afternoon small pleasure because you are 19 and you earn 7 shillings a week, and you are allowed, within reason, to spend a halfpenny on a hot potato on a Saturday afternoon. You eat it standing up, hot and floury, salt from the paper wrapper, the steam of it in the October air. Your chin, without the collar, dropped naturally to your chest to eat it, the neck free to move at whatever angle eating requires, and this small bodily freedom, this nothing, this non-event of an ordinary neck in ordinary movement, has the quality of a small private pleasure that you are not going to mention to anyone. Sunday. Sunday is complicated because Sunday carries with it the dual requirement of church attendance and family. Your family is 2 miles away, which is close enough to make not visiting an active choice rather than a practical impossibility, which means that approximately every 2 weeks you make the journey, take the omnibus down the Old Kent Road to Bermondsey and present yourself at your parents' door. You go this Sunday. You put on the collar because you must. You cannot go to your parents' house without a collar, not because they will say anything, but because the collar is now part of the argument you are making about your life, and removing it for a Sunday visit would be an admission that you are only arguing the case in certain contexts and not others, and you take the omnibus south. The collar on Sunday going to Bermondsey has a different quality from the collar on weekdays. On weekdays it is professional armour. On Sunday, going south, it is evidence. It is a piece of evidence being presented in a case you didn't quite consciously decide to bring, but which is ongoing regardless. The case that the money your parents managed to scrape together for evening school, for the books, for the examinations, for the 2 years of letter writing and getting refused, for everything that preceded the letter from Kettleworth, Mapes and Harbury, that this was correctly spent, that the outcome justifies the cost, that the son with the collar is the answer to the question implied by the sacrifice. Your father is in the kitchen when you arrive. He's a man of 52, broad-shouldered, with hands that are his biography. Tannery hands, hands that have been immersed in tanning liquors and handled wet hides, and worked in the particular chemistry of bark and skin that is the leather industry. Hands that are dark to the wrist and roughened to a consistency that no amount of cleaning entirely resolves. He is drinking tea at the kitchen table and reading a newspaper, and when you come in he looks up and there is a moment, a very brief moment, perhaps a second, of assessment. He is looking at the collar. He always looks at the collar. He doesn't say anything about it. He says Tom, and you say Dad, and your mother, who is at the stove making something that smells of onions and Sunday stock, turns and says your name and smiles. In the way she smiles, that means both welcome and relief. She has been worrying since you left, but she would not say so. You sit at the table. Your father folds his newspaper. The kitchen is small and warm, the small warmth of a kitchen that has been cooking since morning, and it smells of the Sunday meal and of the old familiar smell of the house, which is leather, faint but persistent, worked into the walls over years of your father coming home from the yard, and of the coal in the range and of your mother's soap. Your collar is on. You're sitting at the kitchen table in your Sunday clothes with the collar pressing against your throat, and your chin held at the collar's angle, and your father is looking at you with the slightly sideways look he has developed over the years that you have come to understand means something like, I am watching you become someone I recognize as my son, who is also someone I cannot entirely follow. Settling in, he says. Yes. The work suits you? It's copying, mostly copying. He nods. He knows copying. He doesn't know soliciting, but he knows that copying is how you start everything when someone is checking whether you can be trusted. That'll change, he says. Your mother puts a cup of tea in front of you. You wrap your hands around it. Your hands, which have been cold all week, hands that spend their days managing pen and ledger in a cold back room, and their evenings managing nothing in particular, and the warmth comes through the cup in the specific way of a warmth your body recognizes as the warmth of home, even the home you left, especially the home you left. The collar, your mother says, not quite as a statement. She's looking at it. What about it? Does it fit? Yes. She considers this. Your mother has a gift for looking at a thing and understanding what's happening inside it, and she is applying this gift to the collar, and you are waiting to see what she concludes. Finally she says, "You're holding your head stiff. You always hold your head stiff with a collar. You hold it stiffer than that." She turns back to the stove. It's too tight. It is in fact exactly the right size. It is a 3.5, properly measured, properly made, properly starched. It is too tight in the sense that any collar that must be worn for 9 hours a day is too tight for the body that wears it. But that is a category of tight that is both inevitable and beside the point. And you do not say this. "I'm fine," you say. Your father is still looking at you with the sideways look. "Are you eating?" he says. "Mrs. Beale's suppers? Is she a good cook?" "She's a reliable cook." Your father nods slowly. Reliable is the word he respects. Reliable is the word of a man who has sent his son into the world and wants to know the world is managing to sustain him. After the tea, after the Sunday dinner, roast mutton, potatoes, a gravy of great earnestness, you sit in the front room with your father while your mother clears, and your father smokes his pipe, and you are in the room you grew up in, with the furniture you grew up with, the familiar creak of the settle when you shift your weight, the smell of the pipe and the coal and the old walls, and your collar is on, and the collar is there between you and the room. A small distance it creates by its presence, not a hostile distance, not a rejecting distance, just the distance between the person who grew up in this room and the person this room is now looking at. Your father smokes. You sit. The collar presses against your throat. "Your mother's right," your father says eventually, "about the collar." "I said I'm fine." "I know what you said." He taps his pipe against the grate, a deliberate sound, the sound of a man choosing his words. "What I mean is, she's right that it doesn't look right on you yet." He glances at you. "Give it time." "I've been wearing it 3 weeks. That's nothing. I've been wearing the yard for 30 years and there's still days it doesn't look right on me." He stands up, stretching with the slightly painful deliberateness of a man whose back is a long-term project. The collar fits when you stop thinking about it. You're thinking about it. You look at him. He is not looking at you. He is looking at the window, at the late afternoon light going grey in the court outside. "How do you stop?" you say. He picks up his cup. "You wake up one day and you've stopped." He goes toward the kitchen. The not thinking is what takes the time. This is the longest speech your father has made about anything related to your life in the city. You sit with it for a moment in the front room, in the old familiar smell of the house, with your collar on. Then you stand up, put on your coat, say goodbye to your mother and walk to the omnibus stop. The collar presses against your throat all the way back to Tabard Street. Monday again. The city's weekly reset. There is a particular quality to Monday morning in London in 1884. It is not the quality of beginning. Nothing in Victorian London begins on Monday. Everything is ongoing. The city is a continuous process that does not start or stop. But it is the quality of reinstatement, of the working week reinstating itself after Sunday's interruption, of the surfaces being re-established. On Sunday you can, if you choose to, exist in your indoor clothes and your loose shirt and your soft shoes. On Monday those things go away and the collar comes back, and with it the whole apparatus of the version of yourself that the city requires you to be. You fasten the collar with the practice of someone who has now done it more than 20 times. The back stud, the front stud, the collar band against the shirt neckband, the points folded down. You stand before the small mirror. The collar holds your chin up. You look like a junior clerk. This is the beginning of the collar's education, not the collar's education. Yours. The collar is already what it is. It was made in a factory somewhere. You don't know where. The label says made in England, which is large enough to be geographic poetry, and then starched and pressed by Mrs. Parks. And it is what it is, and it will be what it is for as long as the starch holds. It does not learn. It does not accommodate. You accommodate. And the accommodation, you are beginning to understand, is the point. The collar is not wearing you. You are wearing the collar. The distinction is supposed to be clear. You are the subject. The collar is the object. And what the collar communicates is under your control, because you put it on in the morning and take it off at night. And it is a tool, a social instrument, a piece of the vocabulary you are learning to speak. This is the official account. This is the account your father was gesturing at, with his talk of the collar fitting when you stop thinking about it. The collar becomes invisible when it has been fully integrated, when the integration goes in both directions, when not only you have adjusted to the collar, but the collar has become part of you in the social sense, legible to observers as naturally attached, as a genuine expression rather than an aspiration being performed. But there is another account. There is the account of the pressure against the throat. There is the account of Mrs. Parks's roughened hands and the basement below Tabard Street. There is the account of the collar and cuff laundry district, the economy of maintenance that keeps the surfaces clean, the invisible labour that the visible surface depends on. In this account, the collar is not just worn by you, it is worn against you. It is a requirement that someone else set, in conditions that predate you, and that you have no power to alter, and the choice you have is not whether to wear it, but only how to wear it. And the wearing of it costs money you can barely spare and labour someone else barely survives. And the thing it produces, your respectable appearance, your legible status, your readable surface, is a message that is entirely about what you are not. You are not your father. You are not the tannery. You are not the hands in the tanning liquor and the leather smell and the yard. You are the clean collar, the copied figures, the pen and ledger. You are the man whose neck is contained and whose head is held up, and whose body is, for 9 hours a day, the surface that his situation requires. Both accounts are true. The collar is both of these things simultaneously, and the discomfort of wearing it, the physical discomfort, the tightening over the course of the day, the slight rawness at the back of the neck by evening, is possibly just the physical manifestation of holding two incompatible true things in the same body at the same time. These are the thoughts of a junior clerk on a Monday morning. They are not thoughts that help you get through the copying, so you put them down and pick up the pen and begin. Several weeks pass. This is the thing about apprenticeships, and what you're doing is functionally an apprenticeship, even if the firm calls it a junior clerkship and pays it a salary rather than a premium. The thing about them is the time. The time takes more time than expected. You knew, going in, that you were looking at years of this. Years of copying, years of the back room with Archibald Finch and Herbert Graves, years of 7 shillings rising to perhaps 8, and then perhaps 9 as your tenure increases. You knew it was a long road. But knowing and living are different processes, and the living in these early months has a quality of elongation that is different from what you imagined. The days are not bad days. Nothing goes wrong specifically. Mr. Craddock gives you more complex copying toward the end of October. By November, you are trusted with certain client correspondence, proofreading the letters that go out under Mr. Harbury's signature, checking the drafts against the original instructions. This is progress. It is very slow progress, but it is progress. Archibald Finch notices and becomes slightly less condescending. Herbert Graves does not notice, or if he notices, he does not indicate it. The weather gets colder, the fog gets thicker. By November, the city in the mornings is sometimes nearly dark until 9 o'clock, the gas lamps burning late into what should be daylight, the streets damp and gloomy, the omnibus windows fogged from the inside with the breath of the passengers. The cold makes the collar harder. The starch sets firmer in cold weather, and the collar in the cold of a November morning has a rigidity that is 1 degree more absolute than its October version. You fasten it and feel it immediately, sharper than usual, the points crisper against the skin. Your neck, by November, has the specific toughening of the skin that comes from daily pressure. Not calluses, not thickened skin, but a desensitization, a decrease in the background awareness of the collar, exactly as Sidney predicted and as your father described. You notice the collar less. This is not the same as it hurting less. It is the same as your ability to attend to it decreasing. The collar is there, the collar is always there, but by November you are not spending the afternoon composing internal paragraphs about it. You are spending the afternoon copying property schedules and drafting letters of inquiry, and making the incremental progress of someone who is learning the grammar of a profession 1 clause at a time. One morning in November, something unexpected happens. You arrive at Fetter Lane at 7:58. You have achieved, through practice, a reliable arrival time of between 7:55 and 8, which is the territory of competence rather than either eagerness or lateness. And you go upstairs as usual with the correspondence from the Morning Post that Mr. Craddock has sorted and separated into piles according to destination. You have done this errand before, twice a week, carrying letters up to the senior partner's offices on the upper floors. Usually you leave them in the outer office with the senior clerk, a man named Whitfield, who receives them without acknowledgement in the way that a letterbox receives letters. But today, Whitfield is not in the outer office. The outer office is empty. From behind the inner door, the door marked Harbury on a small brass plate, comes the sound of a conversation, and then the door opens and a man looks out. You have not seen Mr. Harbury before. You've seen his name on letters and on the brass plate and on the document headings, but you have not seen his face. He is a man of about 55, not tall, with grey side whiskers and the particular indoor white complexion of someone who spends their professional life in rooms, a face that is precise and watchful and slightly tired in the way of people whose profession involves attending constantly to other people's problems. He looks at you. You look at him. His collar is extraordinary. You've been wearing collars for several weeks and looking at collars with the focused attention of the recently converted, but you have not seen a collar quite like Mr. Harbury's. It is, formally, a collar of the type you yourself wear, the wing type, points folded down, white linen, properly starched. But the starch on it is at a level of performance you have not previously encountered. It is rigid with a kind of authority. The points are perfectly level. The inner edge, which on your collar by mid-morning shows the faint print of skin contact, on this collar shows nothing, maintains its flat, precise surface, as if it is still in the cardboard box it came from. The shirt beneath it, visible at the breast where the coat lapels part, is of the kind of white that makes your own shirts, fresh from Mrs. Park's, look slightly grey. This collar has not been done in a basement in Suffolk. This collar is the product of an entirely different level of laundry work, probably the work of a specialist establishment in the West End that charges several times what Mrs. Parks charges and produces results in a different category from what Mrs. Parks produces. This collar is the collar of a senior solicitor. It communicates, in its rigidity and its whiteness and its absolute composure, that the man wearing it has reached a position where the surfaces do not require active maintenance. The surfaces maintain themselves. "You're one of Craddock's," Mr. Harbury says. "Yes, sir. Harlow, junior clerk." He takes the letters you're carrying. He looks at you for a moment with the precise watchfulness of his profession. "How long have you been with us?" "8 weeks, sir." Craddock says you have good hands. This means your handwriting is legible and accurate. In a solicitor's office, this is not a minor thing. "Thank you, sir." He goes back into his office. The door closes. You go back downstairs. Good hands. You think about this for the rest of the morning. Good hands. A turn of phrase that means the opposite of what it means where you come from. In the tannery, good hands means the hands themselves, the strength and endurance and specific calluses of a man who does physical work. In the solicitor's office, good hands means the thing the hands produce, the quality of the script, the cleanliness and consistency of the letter forms on the page. The same phrase, opposite meaning, different world. The body is the same in both. The hands are the same hands. It's only the work they do that's different. You copy for the rest of the morning with your collar pressing against your throat and Mr. Harbury's remark sitting somewhere in the back of your mind. And later, at lunch, you take the short walk down to the embankment that you've begun taking on clear days when the weather permits it, because the embankment means the river, and the river is the only place in this part of London where the horizon is not a wall. The Thames embankment is new, or relatively new. The great works of construction were completed in the 1860s and early 1870s. The muddy river bank replaced with the great granite retaining wall, the riverside walks created, the newly constructed Victoria embankment running from Blackfriars to Westminster. The engineering underneath this walk, the Metropolitan Railway's district line, the main sewer, the gas and water pipes, is invisible from above. What you walk on is the surface. Clean granite, wide paths, regular lamps even in daylight, the occasional plane tree transplanted here to give the impression that the embankment is a place of leisure rather than infrastructure. You walk along it in your lunch half hour, collar up against the November cold, hands in your coat pockets looking at the river. The Thames is never attractive in any conventional sense. It is a working river, an industrial river, a river that has been the highway and the sewer of this city for longer than anyone's grandparents can account for. And it looks like what it is. Grey-brown, turbid, carrying things both identifiable and otherwise on its surface, its banks lined with the wharves and landing stages and warehouses that represent its real function. But it is also wide, and the wideness of it, the fact that you can stand on the embankment and look across 50 yards of open water to the opposite bank, is not nothing in a city where your visual field is almost constantly terminated by buildings. Today the river is the colour of pewter, the sky above it a paler grey, and in the middle distance a string of barges is being towed downstream by a small steam tug, its funnel producing a thin black line of smoke that rises and then disperses into the grey air. The tide is running out or running in. You have not yet learned to read tidal movement with any precision, though the river's direction of flow seems to change throughout the day in ways that suggest it has its own agenda unrelated to gravity. And the water at the embankment wall has a slight chop, a small restlessness. On the other side of the wall, below you, the water moves past in its heavy, grey, imperturbable way. The river does not care about collars. The river does not care about junior clerks or their handwriting, or their boarding house suppers, or the distance between 7 shillings a week and a collar that never loses its whiteness. The river is simply proceeding with the business of being a river, the same business it has been proceeding with for the 2,000 years this city has been a city. The same business it will be proceeding with long after the last collar has been worn by the last Victorian gentleman who felt that his neck required management. The river is, in this sense, the collar's opposite. The collar is temporary, maintained, artificial, continuously requiring labour to sustain its surface. The river is permanent, unmaintained, natural, not caring in the least what it looks like to anyone watching. You stand there for your remaining 10 minutes of lunch half hour and look at the river, and then you turn around and walk back to Fetter Lane with your collar on. It is in this period that the celluloid question becomes real. Not for you specifically, not yet, but in the general air of London's working life, in the newspapers and the conversations in the back room, and the running commentary that Sydney keeps up about the world as he moves through it, the question of celluloid collars is becoming more present, more contested. The men who wear them defend them. The men who don't wear them assert their superiority with the confidence of people who don't have to worry about tuppence each per collar per week. The haberdashers are doing a brisk trade in both. The specific anxiety about celluloid is new in 1884, but it's not speculative. There have been enough incidents by now, enough reports of scorched collars, enough near misses with gas lamps, at least one documented case of serious burns from a collar fire at a music hall, that the concern is real. The music hall case circulated through the back room in the form of a story. A man had been leaning forward toward the stage during a performance, and his celluloid collar had come into contact with one of the new electric arc lights that some of the halls had installed, and the collar had caught with a speed that left the man with burns to the throat and chin before he could tear it off. The story was told with the quality of a cautionary tale, and then argued about in the way cautionary tales are argued about. Someone said it couldn't happen that fast. Someone said it definitely could. Someone cited a friend of a friend who had worked in a manufacturing facility where they used celluloid and had seen similar things. Herbert Graves, who had been listening to this conversation without appearing to participate, said quietly from behind his ledger, "The material is nitrocellulose, the same family as gun cotton. The burning rate is faster than paper by a factor of approximately 4. He turned a page. I read about it. There was a silence in the back room. That's the collar, Archibald Finch said. The celluloid variety. The linen is fine. He glanced up. Obviously. The silence extended itself. I'll stay with linen, Archibald Finch said. That seems sensible, Herbert Graves said, and went back to his copying. You think about this walking home. Nitrocellulose, the burning rate, the fact that the thing around a man's neck in its cheap and convenient modern form is made from a material that is chemically adjacent to explosives. The fact that this is known, documented, a matter of chemical record, and people are wearing the things anyway, because they are cheaper and more convenient, and the odds on any given day of your collar catching fire are small. The odds of dying of apoplexy with a collar pressing against your carotid artery are also small on any given day. The Fata murder was a name, not a statistical certainty. The father in the chair, if he existed, was one father in one chair at the end of a long evening and a long life. The collar is not a weapon. It is not designed to harm you. It is designed to contain you, to frame you, to make you legible in the language of surfaces, and if occasionally a man dies in his chair or a collar catches fire, these are not flaws in the design. They are consequences of other things: the softening arteries of old age, the combustibility of cheap materials, the proximity of open flame in a city built on fire. The design works as intended. The design produces white surfaces and visible hierarchies, and the automatic readability of a man's situation from the thing around his neck. The design is very good. December arrives, and with it two things: the cold, which becomes serious, a proper London winter cold that comes off the river in the mornings and finds every gap in your clothing with the precision of a professional, and the Christmas preparations, which in a solicitor's office means an acceleration of activity before the holiday shutdown and a corresponding increase in the amount that the junior clerks are required to copy. Your hands, by December, have developed the winter characteristics of hands that are washed in cold water every morning and then spend the day holding a pen in a cold room, slightly rough at the knuckles, slightly dry, with the tendency to crack at the joints in very cold weather. You put goose fat on them in the evenings, rubbing it in at the knuckles, a habit your mother taught you. The goose fat smell is not compatible with the clean smell of a respectable office, so you must apply it only at night, and by morning the smell is mostly gone, though there are occasional moments in the back room when you wonder if anyone can detect it, and whether goose fat on the hands of a junior clerk is a surface that communicates something you would prefer it didn't. Mr. Craddock, in the second week of December, gives you a new assignment: not copying, composition. You are to draft a standard letter, a form letter sent to clients regarding changes in the firm's address for service, and the draft will be reviewed before being sent to Mr. Harbury for approval. This is not a significant task. It is a letter that exists in several previous versions in the files, and requires you to update the dates and the specific language concerning the change in question, and perhaps, if you choose to, if you have enough confidence, to improve slightly upon the existing phrasing. But it is composition. It is not copying. It is the smallest possible step from the back room to something else, the thinnest slice of what the profession actually involves. But it is a slice. You draft it in the back room on a Tuesday afternoon, with your collar on and your pen moving across the paper, and Archibald Finch occasionally looking sideways at your page with barely concealed curiosity, and Herbert Graves not looking at your page at all, and the December light going fast outside the window. You draft it, and you draft it again. You improve a phrase. You remove a clause that is redundant. You add a clause that clarifies an ambiguity in the preceding version that you noticed only because you have been reading documents closely for 3 months and have developed a specific attention for places where legal language becomes unclear. You reread the final draft. You fold it, mark it for Mr. Craddock, place it in the outgoing pile. The following day, Mr. Craddock comes in with the draft in his hand. "Harlow?" "Sir?" He holds up the draft. "Where did you get the phrasing in the third paragraph?" You tell him. You composed it, borrowing its structure from a precedent letter in the files, but altering the language to address the specific change in question. He looks at the draft. He looks at you. He looks at the draft again. "It's better than the original," he says. He puts it down on your desk. "Do the covering letter in the same style, both on my desk by 4. He goes back to the front office. You look at the draft on your desk. It is better than the original. This is, within the confined world of Kettleworth, Mapes, and Harbury's back room, a considerable thing, not a revolution, not a promotion, not a change in salary or title or anything visible, but Mr. Craddock, who has been with the firm for 30 years and who does not give compliments in any currency that he doesn't consider earned, has said that a piece of work you produced is better than what came before it. You pick up your pen. The collar presses against your throat. You begin the covering letter. Your father was right. You have, sometime in these weeks between October and December, stopped thinking about the collar. Not completely. There are still mornings when the stud catches, and evenings when the rawness at the back of the neck is more pronounced than usual. But in the general course of the day, the collar has receded from the foreground of your awareness into the background, and the things that occupy the foreground have shifted. The work, the quality of the draft, the small movement from copying to composition, the question of what comes next. The collar is still there. The collar is always there. But it has become, and this is the word your father would use, part of the surface. It belongs to the version of you that exists between leaving the boarding house in the morning and returning to it in the evening. It is, in the language of Victorian dress and deportment, and the whole elaborate performance of class and aspiration, what you look like. What you look like and what you are have always been different things. This is not a Victorian discovery. This is a human condition. But the Victorians refined the gap between the two with a thoroughness and an intensity that deserves its own kind of respect. The whole project of the collar, the starched collar, the rigid collar, the collar that holds the chin up and keeps the head at the angle of authority, is a project of managed distance between the body as it is and the body as it must appear. It is not deception in any simple sense, because everyone knows the collar is a collar. It is not pretense exactly. It is more like a shared agreement to read surfaces as character, and to maintain these surfaces with sufficient consistency that the agreement holds. The agreement holds. It has been holding for several centuries in various forms, and it will continue to hold for several more decades after the moment you're living in, before finally the 20th century arrives and decides, for a number of reasons connected to war and modernity and the general exhaustion of maintaining the fiction, to loosen certain things, but that is later. Right now it is December 1884, and you're 19 years old, and you're a junior clerk at a solicitor's firm in Holborn, and your collar is on, and you have just been told that your work is better than what came before it, and tonight you will go home on the omnibus and remove the collar and eat Mrs. Beale's Thursday herrings and sit by the stove with Sidney and his newspaper, and the collar will sit on the table in the attic room, holding its shape in the dark. The specific smell of fresh starch, the particular cold of the back of the neck on a morning in December before the collar warms, the sound of the pen scratching across the ledger, and the sound of the omnibus, and the sound of the church bells calling the morning, the smell of Mrs. Parks's basement work, transferred to the clean white surface of the thing you wear. This is the story of the collar, not the grand story, not the history of the collar as social artifact, which is a story that begins in the 16th century and runs through ruffs and stocks and cravats, and the fata murder, and the butterfly and the wing, and the standing and the folded down, through the labours of laundresses and starch makers and collar manufacturers, and the women who worked the celluloid presses in the factories in the north. Though that story is there, underneath, this is the other story. The story of wearing it. This story of the body's slow accommodation of the thing it must accommodate. The daily negotiation between what you are and what you must look like. The small economics of tuppence per collar and fourpence discretionary income and the woman in the basement who makes the surface possible. The story of trying to become someone, not a different person, the same person, but with a collar that fits. January. The year turns, the cold deepens, and the city enters its January quality, which is the quality of an engine running at reduced power. The fog is daily, sometimes all day, a white-grey presence that sits in the streets and thickens the air and muffles sound so that the usual London noise arrives from a few feet rather than from across the street. The gas lamps burn through the middle of the day. The trees in the Temple Gardens, on your lunchtime walk when the weather permits, are bare, their shapes stark against the pale sky, holding their winter patience. Mr. Craddock gives you more composition work. You draft letters, you draft summaries of correspondence, you draft, under close supervision and with multiple revisions, a short memorandum concerning a property dispute that will be presented to Mr. Harbury for his review before it goes out. The memorandum comes back with corrections in Mr. Harbury's precise hand. 5 corrections in 3 pages, and Mr. Craddock looks at the returned memorandum and at you and says, 5. Most of my junior clerks get 15. This is how the profession measures itself. You go back to your desk, your collar is on. 5 corrections. Herbert Graves has been here 11 years and gets somewhere between 0 and 5 corrections per document, because Herbert Graves has learned the machine so thoroughly that he is the machine. You're 3 months in and getting 5 corrections. The mathematics of this suggests something that is cautious, but not unreasonable to call progress. Outside, it is January in London, the year 1885 beginning, 3 months since you arrived, the city beginning, very slowly, to feel like a place you know. In the evenings, there is something new. Sydney has found, through connections you have not been introduced to, a literary and debating society that meets on Tuesday evenings in a room above a pub in Cheapside. It is not a prestigious organisation. It is a gathering of young men in similar positions to Sydney. Telegraph clerks, junior bookkeepers, office workers, a school teacher, a man who works for a printing company, who meet every second Tuesday to read papers to each other and argue about things. Sydney has been going for 6 months and speaks of it as a place where things are discussed without the requirement to pretend they are not complicated. He takes you in January. The room above the pub smells of beer from below and tobacco from the men in it, and there are perhaps 15 of them arranged on chairs around a central table, and you are the newest person there and almost the youngest. The paper for the evening is given by the schoolteacher, a man of about 25 named Ellis, who teaches at a boys' school in Islington, and who speaks with a precision that suggests he is accustomed to an audience that requires things to be said clearly. The paper is on the education of the working classes, specifically the question of whether evening school as an institution is adequate to its stated purpose of providing working-class men with the tools for social advancement. You listen to this with a specific attention, because you attended evening school for 2 years, and because the question of whether it was adequate is a question that could be answered in your own person, though you have not yet decided what the answer is. The discussion that follows is engaged and occasionally heated. Several of the men disagree with Ellis's conclusion, which is broadly pessimistic about the capacity of evening school to change structural conditions. One man argues that the problem is not the school but the cost of the collar, using the collar as a kind of shorthand for all the expenses of maintaining a respectable appearance while earning a working-class wage. This gets a response from another man who says the collar is a symbol, not a constraint. And the first man says the difference between a symbol and a constraint is whether you can afford to ignore it. And the discussion continues in this direction for a while. You do not speak at this first meeting. You sit in your chair with your collar on. You're always in your collar when you're out in the evening, though loosening the top button slightly when you're upstairs in the boarding house is a concession Sydney has introduced you to, and you listen. But the discussion follows you home. The collar a symbol and constraint simultaneously, neither quite reducible to the other. The symbol gives you the access. The collar is the ticket, the visible evidence of belonging, the thing that tells Mr. Craddock and Mr. Harbury that you are capable of maintaining surfaces and therefore probably capable of maintaining accuracy and discretion and the other invisible surfaces of legal work. Without the collar, you do not get in the door. The collar is the cost of entry. The constraint is the cost of the collar. The 4p discretionary income, the 8p weekly to Mrs. Parks, the requirement to maintain a thing that requires maintenance to keep being what it needs to be. And under that, the deeper constraint, the collar requires you to perform a legibility that makes certain things visible and certain other things not visible. It makes visible professional competence, respectable status, appropriate aspiration. It makes not visible the tannery, the leather smell, the hands your father has, the kitchen table in Bermondsey where you ate bread and dripping and were told you were putting on airs. This is the function of the collar. This is precisely its function. And the question the man at the debating society was asking, without quite asking it, is whether that function is entirely a service to you, or whether it is partly a service to the structure that requires you to pay for the service. The collar is expensive to wear. The collar is expensive to maintain. The collar is expensive to perform. And the expense falls on you, specifically, not on the structure that requires the collar, not on the firm, not on the profession, not on the city. The expense of maintaining your respectability is fully externalized to you as an individual and then deducted from the slim margin between what you earn and what you need. And the residue is 4p a week of freedom. This is a small observation. It changes nothing. You put your collar on in the morning and take it off in the evening and the city proceeds. February. Something happens in February that is not a large event, not a public event, not something that anyone else in the city would notice or report, but that remains with you in the way small, precise things remain. You're at your desk on a Wednesday afternoon. The window shows a February sky, pale, high, with a faint promise of the earlier sunsets beginning to recede. The heating in the office has been improved over the winter by the addition of a small cast-iron stove in the back room, which Craddock authorised in December after Archibald Finch made the case in terms of the impact of cold on handwriting quality, which was an astute approach. The stove gives the room a warmth it has not had before, a closeness, and in the warmth and the afternoon light, with the pen moving across the page, the room has the quality of a place where work is actually being done, where the rhythm of work has taken hold. Herbert Graves is absent. This is unusual. In 3 months you have never known Herbert Graves to be absent. His desk is empty. His pen is in its holder. His coat is not on the hook. At 4 o'clock Mr. Craddock comes in and sits down, not at a desk. In the chair near the stove, the chair that no one uses because it has no obvious function in a back room where everything has a function. He sits in it and folds his hands in his lap and looks at the window for a moment, and you and Archibald Finch exchange a glance, and then do not exchange another one. Mr. Craddock says, "Graves won't be back." A silence. His health, Craddock says, in a tone that closes the question of what specifically. He's gone to his brother's in Somerset permanently. Another silence. He asked me to pass on his regards. Craddock gets up, straightens himself, the habitual straightening, the collar adjustment, the resumption of the professional surface, and goes back to the front office. You sit at your desk with this news settling around you. Herbert Graves, 11 years, a man of 30 or nearly 30, who has spent the entire decade of his 20s copying documents in a back room, and who has now, through illness, or through something else entirely, or through the combination that is sometimes indistinguishable, gone to Somerset. His desk will be reassigned. A new junior clerk will come. The firm will continue. Archibald Finch says very quietly, "Do you think he was sick? Or did he—" "I don't know," you say. "He always seemed fine." "He seemed contained," you say. "I don't know if that's the same thing." Archibald Finch is 17, and he considers this and then goes back to his copying. You go back to yours. The stove ticks. The February afternoon light fades toward its early conclusion. Herbert Graves, 11 years at his desk. The immaculate handwriting. The 0 to 5 corrections on every memorandum. The pen always in its holder. The collar always correct. The face that revealed nothing, or almost nothing, or the specific nothing that careful people show when they have decided that discretion is the entire policy. You think about him, and then you think about the difference between containment and composure, and then you go back to your copying. In the spring, things begin to loosen slightly as they do. The days get longer. This is not metaphorical. The literal days get longer, which means the light in the office windows is present earlier in the morning and later in the evening, and this extension of light has a quality of opening, of the city's winter compaction releasing slightly, of the streets becoming again places where people move through them rather than simply transit them as quickly as possible. The plane trees on the embankment put out their early leaves, that particular bright green of spring, the first colour in a monochrome city. Your collar is lighter. The winter starch thickness applied by Mrs. Parks, with a slightly heavier hand in the cold months because the cold required it, has been replaced with the spring version, which is precise and correct but less armoured. The collar in spring feels different from the collar in winter. The same pressure, the same architecture. But in the warmth it feels less like a siege instrument, and more like what it is, a piece of fabric, demanding but fabric. The Tuesday Debating Society has continued. You have spoken at 3 meetings now. At the first, something brief and slightly disjointed about the administration of justice as observed through the work of a junior clerk. You had to be careful here, not discussing actual clients, but you could speak to the general atmosphere, the language of the profession, the gap between the legal ideal and the legal process. At the second, a longer piece on the economy of maintaining respectable appearance, which drew heavily on the experience of the collar without naming the collar specifically, and which produced the most engaged discussion of any paper you had heard there, including a man named Drummond who worked in insurance who talked for 20 minutes about how the same dynamic operated in his industry, how the appearance of order was the product of constant invisible maintenance, how the managed surface was the thing that everyone paid for without quite accounting for the cost. After that meeting, Drummond found you in the pub downstairs and bought you an ale and said, "How long have you been at it?" You knew he meant the clerkship. 6 months. "And what do you think of it?" You considered this. "I think it's a long road," you said, "but I think it's the right road." Drummond was perhaps 30. He had a collar similar to yours, though better starched. He looked at you with an expression that was not exactly sympathetic and not exactly calculating, but something in between, the expression of a man evaluating a thing. "Stay with it," he said. "The length of the road is the point of the road. You learn things on a long road you can't learn any other way." He went back to his table. You drank your ale and thought about that. The length of the road is the point of the road. Whether this was wisdom or rationalization was hard to say. It might have been both. May. You have been at Kettleworth, Mapes and Harbury for 8 months. Your salary has been raised to 8 shillings. 1 shilling. 1 shilling per week additional, which is on the one hand a 14% increase, and on the other hand 1 shilling. But you take the 1 shilling, and the recalculation of the budget produces approximately 5p in the discretionary column, which is a 25% improvement in that figure, and 5p is the difference between standing outside the coffee stall on a cold morning and occasionally buying a cup. Mr. Craddock informs you of the raise without ceremony. He hands you a different envelope on Friday and says, 8 shillings from this week. He pauses. Harbury mentioned you. He pauses again. Keep it up. He goes back to his office. Harbury mentioned you. You sit at your desk with this information and the 8 shillings, and consider the fact that a man whose collar you cannot afford to emulate has mentioned your name in a context that has produced an extra shilling a week, and that this is how the machine works, and that you are in it now, and that the length of the road is the point of the road. Your collar is on. It is May. The morning light is clear and early, and outside the city is building toward the summer. Here is what you know about collars by May. You know that the standard collar sizes in 1884 run from 13.5 inches, the smallest size carried by most haberdashers, to 17.5, the largest practical size for a linen collar, though celluloid can be produced in larger sizes for customers whose necks resist the standard range. You know that 3.5 is the measurement of your own neck, being the neck circumference in inches measured at the base, which is the point of the collar contact rather than the throat above, which is different, and this difference is the source of many fitting problems. You know that a well-cut shirt has its neckband matched to the collar size, and that a poorly cut shirt has its neckband in the approximate vicinity of the collar size, and that the difference between these two situations, wearing them through the day, is the difference between a background awareness and an active complaint. You know that the standard collar depth, the height of the standing collar above the collar band, was higher in earlier decades and has been gradually decreasing, that the extreme heights of the 1820s and 1830s that generated the Wartemörder name and the German stories have given way to a more moderate standard by the 1880s, though still, by the standard of what will be worn in the 20th century, quite high. You know that within this standard there are variations, the wing collar and the stand collar and the fold down and the straight standing, each carrying their own social inflection, their own placement in the hierarchy of who wears what. The highest collars in 1884 are worn by men who have achieved a position where the collar's architecture serves as a monument to that achievement. The lower, more practical collars are worn by men still climbing, or men who never started, or men who wear what their budget affords. You know that there are women, specifically women of the working and lower middle classes, who have adopted a form of the collar, a stripped-down version, a linen band or a cloth piece attached to the front of the dress, as a reference to the men's collar, a citation of the symbol without the full weight of the symbol, because the full symbol is too expensive to maintain on a daily domestic basis. But the reference to it communicates something about where you place yourself in relation to the idea of respectable surfaces. You have seen this on Mrs. Beale. You have seen it on women in the offices of clients who come to Fetter Lane with their employers, the secretary or the accompanying woman whose function is uncertain, but whose presence suggests administrative capacity, all of them wearing some version of the collar piece, some form of white at the throat. You know that Mrs. Parker's hands are rough at the wrist, and that the girl who answers the door in the evenings, the older one, the 15-year-old, has the beginning of the same roughness at her knuckles, and that this roughness will develop over the coming years into the same topography as her employers, if she stays in the collar and cuff trade, which she probably will. You know that the collar comes off at night, and that the removal of it is, every night, a small restoration. That the skin at the back of the neck has toughened and is no longer specifically sore in the way it was in October, but that the removal is still a change, a return to something, a brief recollection of a body that lives without architecture. You know that your father was right, that you don't think about it most of the time anymore, and this perhaps is the thing the collar was designed to produce. Not discomfort, not a performance of suffering for the observation of others, but this specific not thinking. The collar is working when you're not working against it. The surface is maintained when you are no longer maintaining it consciously. The respectable appearance is most respectable when it has ceased to be an appearance and become, instead, simply what you look like. This is what the Victorians meant by character, not the internal qualities, not honesty or courage or any of the things the word usually denotes, but the embodied, external, surface consistency. The man of good character is the man whose surfaces are reliable, whose collar is always correct, whose handwriting is always legible, whose word once given can be relied upon because it matches the evidence of everything else about him. The collar, the cuff, the carefully maintained coat, the punctual arrival and punctual departure, the whole daily performance of a person whose relationship with surfaces is one of reliable management. You're becoming this. Not fully, not yet, but the process is underway, and the evidence is in the 8 shillings and in the 5 corrections and in the brief acknowledgement from a senior solicitor that your work is better than what came before it. The collar is tight. The collar is always tight, but it is less tight than it was in October. The city outside is doing its summer preparations, the air warming, the evening light staying later, the horse traffic increasing with the commercial season, the smell of the streets shifting from the wet, cold coal of winter to the complex, warmer, more diverse smell of a city that has shed its winter containment and is operating at full intensity. Vendors are out later. The coffee stall man on Borough High Street is doing morning business until 9. The pie seller near the market has extended his pitch. You walk to the omnibus stop in the morning light with your collar on, and the collar is part of what you are, and the city receives you as what you appear to be, and what you appear to be and what you are have not yet converged entirely, but the gap is smaller than it was in October. This is the story's rhythm, the gap closing, not dramatically, not through any single revelation, but through the accumulation of days and the slow work of learning and the specific education that is available only to a body that spends 9 hours daily in something that doesn't fit and gradually adjusts, or that fits and the body gradually finds the fit, and the difference between those two processes from the outside is invisible. The collar holds its shape. You hold your shape. You walk into the city every morning in the October fog and the February cold and the May warmth, and the collar is on, and the day begins. In the evenings of late May there is still enough light when you get home to take a walk along the borough streets before supper. You do this sometimes, changing your coat but not your collar. The collar stays on until you're in the boarding house for the night, and walking through the neighbourhood in the long summer evening, watching the city in its post-work hour. On one of these walks you pass a newsagent's window, the Standard. Collar deaths. Coroner reports on recent incidents. Small headline, inside page, visible through the glass. You stop. You look at it. Through the glass, in the remaining light, you can make out the first paragraph. The report concerns 3 cases reviewed by a Middlesex coroner over the past 6 months. Cases in which elderly men were found deceased after dinner parties, and in which the examination suggested, not conclusively, the coroner was careful to use the word suggested, a contribution from tight collar band compression of the carotid artery in individuals with pre-existing arterial weakness. 3 cases, not 300. 3. In a city of 4 million people wearing collars for 9 or 10 hours a day. 3 cases. The coroner, according to the paragraph visible through the newsagent's glass, recommended that men over the age of 60 consider collars of a slightly lower height and softer construction, and that haberdashers be encouraged to provide such options. The haberdashers will not be happy about this. The lower collar, the softer collar, the collar that accommodates rather than containing. This is the collar of a man who has given up something. The collar of concession. The collar that says, I am aware of my limits, but 3 cases in 6 months, in a city of how many men, how many collars, how many evenings after dinner. Fete murder. You walk home. The summer light is long and warm and the streets are in their June fullness. People at their windows, children in the courts, the smell of cooking from every open door. The collar is on. Your neck is warm in the warmth. The stud at the back is where it always is. The pressure at the throat is what it always is. You go upstairs. You unfasten the back stud, the front stud. The collar comes off and the evening air is around your neck and you breathe. There is a letter from your mother on the table. You open it. Your mother writes in the careful hand of a woman who went to evening school herself for 2 years, at the age of 30 after her children were old enough to not require constant management, and who has maintained the handwriting practice ever since, writing letters in the evenings with the specific pleasure of a person who understands that writing is a kind of possession. The letter says, your father has been poorly this week. Nothing serious, a chest cold, but he's been home from the yard for 2 days. The weather in Bermondsey has been fine. Your sister Mary has found a position as a needlewoman at a dressmaker's on the commercial road. There is news about the neighbours. Your mother ends with, I am glad you are well. The collar suits you. She cannot see you. She's not seen you since the Sunday visit in the autumn before Christmas, when she noted that you were holding your head stiff. She's not visited Fetter Lane or the boarding house, or the Tuesday debating society, or the embankment walk, or any of the geography of your daily life. She's writing from a kitchen in Bermondsey about a man with a chest cold and a daughter who sews. The collar suits you. You put the letter on the table beside the collar. They sit there together in the evening light. The stiff, white shape of the collar and the slightly creased sheet of your mother's letter. 2 objects that contain information. 2 surfaces with things underneath them. You wash your face and hands and go downstairs for supper. The summer. The city in the summer is a different city from the city in the winter. Hotter, smellier, louder, more urgent in its outdoor life. More concentrated in the smells that the cold weather suppressed. The Thames is worse in summer, its smell preceding it by several hundred yards. The mud and the cargo and the general ambition of a river that has been used as a sewer for several centuries, all concentrated by the heat, into something that is very much present. The street smell of horses, the back court smell of the privies. The fog is gone, but the coal smoke is not, combined now with the summer heat into something that sits at a different level, thicker in the chest. The collar in summer is an achievement. You understand this now, in a way you didn't in October. The October collar was a cold, rigid thing, and you were cold, uncomfortable body trying to accommodate it. The summer collar is a different challenge. The heat brings the sweat, and the sweat is the collar's enemy. The thing the collar exists in opposition to, not because the collar absorbs the sweat, but because the sweat in contact with the starch over the course of a hot day produces a chemistry of slow degradation. The starch loses its edge. The inner band darkens faster. The collar can survive a winter day in relative condition. A summer day asks more of it. You have adjusted your collar schedule for the summer. You now send them to Mrs. Park's twice a week instead of once. This means 16 pence per week rather than 8 pence, which is almost all of your discretionary income, and the calculation of the summer budget is a calculation of what can be removed to accommodate the collar's summer needs. You have removed the occasional Tuesday evening ale at the debating society. You attend but drink water. You have removed the baked potato on the Borough High Street. The potato cost a halfpenny. This matters. But the collar must be correct, and in summer correct means twice a week, and twice a week means the potato does not happen, and this is the economy of the maintained surface. The surface does not maintain itself for free. At the debating society in July you give a paper, not the first paper you've given there. That was in February, tentative, more observation than argument, but a longer, more considered one, on the economics of respectability, using the collar as its central example. You have been working on it in the evenings after supper, by candlelight in the back room with Sydney's newspaper rustling across the table. You have been working out what you think. What you think is this: the collar is a currency. It is a currency in the economy of legibility, of readable surfaces, of the social information that a city of several million strangers must be able to read at a glance about each other in order to function. Without the collar, or something like it, the city's hierarchy is invisible. With it, it is legible. The collar makes the city readable. It makes commerce possible, or at least easier, because the collar tells the merchant immediately who he is dealing with, at what level, with what expectations. It makes employment possible, or at least faster, because the collar tells the employer before a word is spoken that the candidate has managed to produce and maintain a surface, which is a demonstration of certain underlying capacities. The collar is not free. It costs money to maintain, labour to produce, physical endurance to wear. It costs the wearer the privacy of their actual situation, because the collar does not communicate what is true. It communicates what is managed. It costs the laundress her hands and her hours and her marginal economy. It costs the manufacturer of celluloid the occasional fire and the occasional lawsuit. It costs the carotid artery of elderly men, occasionally under very specific conditions, the degree of pressure that tips a marginal situation into a fatal one. The cost is widely distributed. The benefit, the legibility, the readability, the function of the surface as social communication is also widely distributed. But the distribution is not equal, and the question of who pays more than they benefit from the arrangement is a question that the collar, in its whiteness and its rigidity and its clean indifference to the details of how it got there, does not address. This is what you say, approximately, to the 15 men in the room above the Cheapside pub in July 1885, and the discussion afterward is the longest and most animated of any you have participated in. And afterward Drummond from the insurance company buys you a proper ale and says, "That was the best paper we've had in 6 months." And you say thank you and drink your ale and think about the collar sitting upstairs in the attic room on Taybrook Street, holding its shape in the dark. The collar doesn't know what you said about it. The collar is not equipped to know things. The collar is starch and linen, and the accumulated skill of a woman in a basement and the accumulated habit of a civilization that decided several centuries ago that the neck is the right place to put the evidence of a person's social commitments, and the collar maintains this decision with absolute loyalty. You maintain it too. Every morning the back stud, the front stud, the points folded down. Every evening the release. The cycle continues. In September, the firm takes on a new junior clerk. He is 17 from Islington, with a reference from his father's solicitor. He arrives on his first morning with a collar that is too stiff, the starch done heavy, as if someone wanted to be sure the impression was made, and a posture that tells you everything you need to know about how he has spent the previous 3 weeks, practicing in front of a mirror, adjusting to an architecture that his body has not yet integrated. He holds his chin at exactly the angle the collar demands, with exactly the effortful precision of someone whose body has not yet decided to stop fighting what it can't change. He sits at Herbert Graves's old desk. You watch him from your own desk, not unkindly. Archibald Finch, who is now 18 and has developed in the past year into something more settled and less condescending, gives the new boy the same cloth-in-the-drawer advice that you gave him, which he received from Sydney. The chain of transmission. The information about how to manage surfaces passing from one person to the next, each person adding what they've learned. The new boy's name is Robert Melling. He has dark eyes and quick hands. His handwriting, when he first shows it, is not as good as yours, but has the correctness of something that can be developed. And he flinches at loud noises in the first week, which is one of the signs. On his 3rd day, he says to you in a low voice between tasks, "Does it get easier?" You look at him. He's pointing slightly at his collar. "Yes," you say. "When?" "I can't tell you when," you say. "But yes." He nods. He goes back to his copying. You go back to yours. Outside, September in London, the city contracting slightly from the summer's expansion, the evening shortening, the chill coming back into the mornings, the smell of autumn arriving in the city, a complex smell, coal and leaves, and the specific cold stone smell of old London beginning to assert itself as the season turns. The collar is on. The collar is always on, in the hours between leaving and returning, in the hours of being in the world, the pressure at the throat, the slight raw spot at the back of the neck on long days, the point where the points catch the skin if you turn too quickly without remembering. You remember now. You don't always remember that you remember, but the remembering is there, built into the body, and this is what integration means. It is in the body now, this knowledge of how to move in the collar, how to turn from the shoulders, how to eat without the collar catching the bowl rim, how to breathe in the deep breath the afternoon heat requires without the collar, registering the expansion of the chest as a challenge. 11 months. You're nearly through the first year. The city is no longer a maze. It is a map, and the map is imprecise but functional. The collar is no longer foreign. It is worn. The gap between Thomas Harlow, the leather yard boy, and Thomas Harlow, the junior clerk, has not closed. These are not the same person. These are two versions of a person in different contexts, and the contexts require different things. But the management of the gap has become less effortful. You know which Thomas Harlow to be and where, and the transitions between them have become, if not easy, then practiced. Natural in the way that practice makes things natural, which is not the naturalness of being born to a thing, but the naturalness of having done it so many times that the doing no longer requires the constant foreground attention it once did. This is what your father called it, not thinking. The not thinking is what takes the time. You have been not thinking about the collar for maybe 4 months now. October comes around again, exactly 1 year. The anniversary is not marked. There is no ceremony, no acknowledgement. The days do not care about their anniversaries. October in London is October. The fog, the shortening light, the coal smoke establishing its autumn primacy. The mornings cold enough to require the winter starch again. The collar crisper in the morning for the first few days before your body remaps its relationship with the October version. But you notice that it has been a year, and that you are here, and that the year has produced what it produced. The 8 shillings, the reduced corrections, Mr. Harbury's brief mention of your name, the debating society paper, the ongoing Tuesday evenings, the letter from your mother, the 5p discretionary income, the collar that is now part of what you are in the working hours. You notice on this anniversary morning that you fasten the collar without thinking. Back stud, front stud, you straighten. The collar presses against your throat. This is normal. This is just the morning, just the start of it, just the building of the day's architecture around you. There is someone coming behind you. You don't mean that figuratively. Robert Melling at the desk that was Herbert Graves's is 2 months in, and getting 12 corrections per memorandum and holding his chin up, with the daily effort of a body still negotiating with its requirement, and he will get to 10 corrections and then to 8, and then gradually to 5, and then to 3, and then the corrections themselves will change their character, becoming less about fundamental accuracy and more about style, the refinements of a thing already correctly done. And at some point, several years from now, Robert Melling's collar will cease to be a thing he thinks about, and he will fasten it in the morning without noticing, and this is the chain. Each person who learns the thing becomes the person who knows the thing, and then passes what they know forward, and the collar continues. The collar will continue. It will continue through the 1890s, through the turn of the century, through the Edwardian summer of high starched linen, and the apparent permanence of all arrangements. It will continue through the events of 1914, and what those events do to the maintenance of surfaces, the way war compresses the performance of respectability into something stripped of its elaboration, the way the men who return from France do not want to go back to 11 hours a day in something that holds their necks rigid and was named, in German, for the deaths it caused. After 1918, the collar changes. Not immediately. The inertia of class and dress and the performance of legibility is enormous, and habit outlasts almost everything. But it changes. The collar height decreases year by year. The starch softens. The fold down replaces the standing. By the time the 20th century is properly underway, by the time the interwar years have settled into their particular atmosphere, the collar is a different thing. Lower, softer, designed with more accommodation to the neck inside it. The Varta murder is a memory. The father in the chair is a story someone's grandfather tells. Mrs. Parkes's basement is a social form that will mostly not exist within 30 years. But in 1885, in October, on the first anniversary of your arrival at Kettleworth, Mapes and Harbury, all of that is future. All of that is nothing. The present is the collar and the pen and the ledger and the omnibus and the stove and the Tuesday evenings and the embankment walk and the letter from your mother and the 8 shillings. The present is enough. It is enough. At 5:30 on a Friday in October, the office shuts. Mr. Craddock says good night. You and Robert Melling and Archibald Finch, now promoted in your own mind from Archibald Finch, who'd been there longer than you, to just Finch, an equal, if a slightly junior one, come out into Fetter Lane. The air is cold and sharp and carries the smell of October. A news vendor is calling something about Egypt, the voice going up into the evening air and dispersing into it. You stand for a moment on the pavement before the omnibus stop. The collar is on. Your envelope is in your pocket with the Friday wages. Your hands are cold. The city goes on around you in all directions, its Friday evening expansion, the slight relaxation that comes at the end of the working week, even in a city that doesn't really stop. You are a junior clerk, a year in. You have good hands. You have 5 corrections per memorandum. You have the beginnings of what Mr. Craddock might call, in his most expansive register, promise. You have a collar that fits. The omnibus comes. You get on. The city moves past the windows toward the borough, toward Tabard Street, toward Mrs. Beale's supper, toward the evening when the collar comes off and the neck is free, and the week dissolves into the weekend's different rhythm. You ride through the city with your collar on, and your hands in your coat pockets, and the envelope in your breast pocket, and the collar pressing against your throat in its usual, familiar, habitual way. The way that is no longer remarkable, the way that is now simply one of the properties of being in the world during working hours. The lights come on as the omnibus crosses the bridge, the lamps on the embankment, the gas lamps on the borough streets, the windows of the boarding houses and the shops and the pubs and the domestic fronts of working London, all of them lit against the October dark. And here, now, in the motion of the omnibus and the Friday evening and the lamplit streets and the collar around your throat, there is something. Not a revelation. Not the kind of thing you would try to describe to someone else. Something quieter than that. Something that exists only in the particular combination of this evening and this tiredness, and this 1 year of becoming something you are not quite yet, but are closer to than you were when you started. The collar is on. You have stopped thinking about it. Your father said this would happen, and it did, in the time that it took, which was the time that was necessary, which is the only time anything important takes. Tomorrow is Saturday. Tomorrow the collar comes off at 1 and stays off until Monday. Tomorrow your neck will be free for 36 hours, and the freedom will have the specific quality of not quite noticing it. The way you don't quite notice the freedom of breathing until you've been holding your breath. The omnibus reaches Borough High Street. You get off. The cold air of October on your face and hands. Tabard Street in the evening. The familiar short walk, the familiar door. Upstairs. The familiar cold of the attic room. Sydney is not home yet. The window shows the court below, the pump, the 2 cats that live there, and are permanent residents of the court, one orange, one grey, both invested in their evening business. You unfasten the back stud, the front stud. The collar comes free. The release is what it always is, the absence where the pressure was, the neck suddenly in possession of its own range of motion again. The specific exhale that happens not in the lungs, but in the muscles of the neck and shoulders as they remember that this is how a body moves when nothing is containing it. You put the collar on the table, you put your coat on the hook, You sit on the edge of the bed in the ordinary way of someone whose neck is their own again, and you listen to the sounds of Tabard Street coming up through the floor. The city outside is doing Friday evening things. Voices from the pub at the end of the street, cartwheels. Somewhere someone is playing a concertina. Badly but committedly. A sound that carries through the cold air with the particular persistence of something that doesn't know it's bad. You are warm enough, you are fed enough, you are safe enough. Your collar is on the table, your 8 shillings are in your pocket, your year is done. The room is dark except for the candle you lit, its small circle of warmth keeping the October evening in its appropriate distance. Outside, the city runs on its evening rails, its pub noise and its cartwheel noise and its badly played concertina noise. Inside, the boarding house is settling into its nighttime rhythms, the sounds of Mrs. Beale in the kitchen below, the creak of Sidney's step on the landing as he comes in sometime after 8, the thin walls doing what thin walls do, which is to let through just enough of the other lives around you to remind you that they're there. You lie down without undressing, just the coat off, the boots, the collar already long since removed. You lie on your back on the straw mattress and look at the ceiling, which is the same ceiling it was in October a year ago, the same water stain in the near corner, the same crack running from the window frame toward the middle, the same general feeling of a ceiling that has been sealing for a long time and has opinions about nothing. Tomorrow, Saturday, half day, the afternoon yours. Sunday, if you choose it, the visit south to your parents' house, and the kitchen that smells of leather and coal, and your mother's good cooking. Monday, the collar again, the omnibus again, the copying again, the year extending forward in the same direction it has been going, the road going on. You close your eyes. The sounds of the city are familiar now. They were, a year ago, a wall of noise, everything loud and alien, the city pressing itself against your senses with the confidence of something that knows it's enormous. Now they are a background. The concertina already has faded to a distance. The cartwheels on cobbles are just the sound of carts on cobbles. The voices from the pub are the texture of Friday evening, not the threat of it. You have been learning all this year what things cost. The collar costs 8p per week, and 2p replacement for every new one. The omnibus costs 3 shillings and 4p. Mrs. Beale's board costs 4 and 6p. Your father's advice about not thinking cost a winter and a spring and a summer and an autumn of daily putting on and taking off a collar until the putting on became invisible. The advice from the man at the debating society. The length of the road is the point of the road. That costs something too, though the currency isn't one you can name exactly. It cost the acceptance of slowness. It cost the comparison between Herbert Graves's 11 years and your one, and the decision that the comparison is not the point. It cost the evening when you read the coroner's report in the newsagent's window, and stood on the pavement of Borough High Street and thought about the father in the chair and what it means to maintain a surface, long past the body's ability to maintain it. What it cost Mrs. Parks you don't know in full. You know what she charged you for it. You don't know what the charge doesn't cover. The candle gutters on the windowsill. The circle of warmth shrinks slightly. The room's darkness pressing forward. You have a year in the city. You have a collar that fits. You have somewhere in the accumulation of days and small adjustments and things learned through repetition until they were no longer remarkable. Become a version of yourself that exists in this place. Not the version from Bermondsey and not the version you imagined coming here. Something that is neither of those things and both of them. Something being made. The church bells somewhere in the distance. St. George the Martyr, most likely, though there are dozens, and at this hour and this distance they're all just bells. All just the city marking its time in the way it has been marking time since there were bells to mark it. The sound rises and falls and disperses into the October air, and what's left after it is the quieter sound of the city as it settles, the way all large things settle into their night version, reduced but not stopped, present but at a different register, the engines still turning, the fires still burning, the great machinery of 4 million lives still processing its daily material, even as most of those lives are, or are trying to be, asleep. Somewhere, in a basement 2 streets away, tomorrow's collars are being prepared. Or they will be, in the morning. Mrs. Parks rising before light to begin the copper boiler, the starch pot, the sequence that produces the thing you will fasten around your neck on Monday morning, the thing she will never see worn, the thing whose function, once it leaves her hands, belongs to someone else's performance, someone else's legibility in someone else's world. You breathe. The collar is on the table. The starch smell is faint in the room, the smell of Monday's version already present in some atmospheric sense, the smell of the thing that will be put back on, the week that will resume. Tonight it is not on. Tonight your neck is free. The straw mattress, the thin blanket, the familiar ceiling above and the familiar street sounds below, and the familiar weight of a day that was like all the other days and was exactly its own day, unrepeatable, already becoming memory. You are warm enough. The candle is almost done. Sidney will come in later and take off his own collar and fall into the other bed, and the room will have the breathing of 2 people in it, and the night will do what nights do, which is to take the day's account and file it somewhere that isn't quite forgetting and isn't quite remembering. Centuries from now, the collar will be a museum object, encased in glass, labelled, described in the language of social history, an example of early Victorian occupational dress, representing the intersection of class aspiration and laundry economics, of the body as a site of social performance, of the invisible labour that maintained the visible surface. Museum visitors will look at it through the glass and see a white curved shape, rigid, slightly yellowed at the inner band, still holding in its stiffened linen the shape of a neck that has been gone for 150 years. They will not feel the pressure against the throat. They will not know the smell of fresh starch on a Monday morning. They will not know the slight rawness at the back of the neck by evening, or the relief of the back stud released, or the specific quality of the first breath drawn with the collar off. They will know the object. They will not know the wearing of it. But somewhere, perhaps, in the still persistent structure of the human workday, in the requirement that surfaces be managed and appearances maintained, and the gap between who you are and what you must look like be bridged daily, by means that cost more than they appear to, somewhere in that structure the collar is still going, not in linen and starch, in whatever form the current century has found for it, in whatever version of the requirement to look correct, to hold your chin at the necessary angle, to present a surface that communicates what the situation requires. The collar changes form. The requirement continues. You are a junior clerk. You have good hands. Your neck tonight is your own. Tomorrow the collar will be on the table waiting. On Monday it will be back where it belongs or back where it is required, which are the same thing now. But that is Monday. Tonight, the straw mattress, the cooling candle, the October air coming through the gap at the window frame, carrying with it the smell of the city at rest. coal and river and cold stone and the faint complicated smell of 1,000,000 lives being lived all at once in one enormous place. Let the sounds come in from the street, the Friday evening sounds, the pub and the carts and the concertina, now mercifully faded. Let them come in and settle and become part of the background, and then become part of something quieter than background, something that is not quite silence, but is the city's version of it, the minimum the city operates at when most of it has agreed, for these hours to allow the processing of the day to slow. Let your thoughts slow too. The memoranda and the corrections and the 8 shillings and the letter from your mother and the collar and Mrs. Parker's hands and the debate about the symbol and the constraint and the man at the debating society and the length of the road and your father in the kitchen saying the not thinking is what takes the time. Let all of it slow. Let it recede to the distance the night requires. You have earned this rest. The candle goes out. The room is dark, the window's October sky barely pale, the court below quiet. The 2 cats gone wherever cats go when they're done with their evening. The city outside has reached its night minimum. Your neck is free. Your collar is on the table in the dark, holding its shape, waiting for Monday, patient in the way that objects are patient, which is the patience of things that do not require anything to be otherwise than it is. And you are here. Thomas Harlow, 1 year, junior clerk, boy from Bermondsey, person still being made, present and warm and tired and as close to wherever you're going as a year of going there has brought you. The city breathes outside. You breathe with it. The sleep comes the way sleep comes after the year that has been this year, the way the collar stopped being noticed gradually and then completely, and then you looked back and it was just part of you, the way the city stopped being enormous and became the city you live in, the way the gap between who you are and what you must appear to be narrowed to something you can hold in one hand, the way things that take time, good night.